The night shift at a second-rate fast food taco joint is where time goes to die. Minutes take hours and hours take years. There are only so many times a person can fill the sour cream and guacamole, guns in one go, without wanting to put them to your temple and pull the trigger. Would it kill you? No. Would it make a mess? Absolutely. And what a godsend that would be. It would give you something to do. Mass Tacos was in the Bentwater Corners, a small suburban strip mall with little to no foot traffic. Every store here was the generic version of something more successful. Like a copy, it never looked as good as the original. I told friends Bentwater Corners was the island of misfit toys. It surprised me we stayed in business at all. We were located between Burgers Ahoy, another also-ran chain restaurant, and the confusing Bank of Chester. I don't know if someone named the bank after a founder or a city named Chester, and it was never explained to me. In the 5 months I worked at the Taco Shack, I'd never seen a person enter or exit the bank. Hell, I'd never even seen anyone use the ATM. Not even to pull out drug money. My school schedule forces me to work late nights. I'm there from 6 in the evening until around midnight or a little after, depending on how much cleaning we have to do. Often I'm in my car by 12:01. Like I said, we're never busy. After our dinner rush of about 6 to 15 people, we have nothing but time to kill. We clean and prep, and once that's done, we double and triple check our work. If we still have time, the entire shift takes turns fucking around on their phone while keeping an eye out for Mary, our manager. I didn't mind Mary. After years of being a stay-at-home mum, her divorce suddenly threw her back into the workforce. Sometimes she acted a bit harried and cracked the whip, but she was also understanding. Mary wasn't the ogre some of my fellow co-workers made her out to be. She was the boss, and had to do boss things occasionally. Those actions often flew in the face of people trying to do as little as possible and still stay gainfully employed. Most nights I worked with the same crew of miscreants. They were an eclectic bunch, but we all got along. It's like soldiers in the army. You're thrown into a foxhole with whoever and end up bonding over your shared trauma. Most nights, it was me, an aspiring rapper named Doug, aka Thar Dougfather, Jenna, a social media influencer in training, and a rotating cast of new hires. This night, the new guy was a pale goth guy named Reggie. If you ask me, Reggie isn't exactly a goth-sounding name, but who am I to judge? Tonight, while we were going about our normal Dodge Mary routine, I heard Mary let loose a string of curse words from her little office that'd make a sailor blush. I took this as a cue to put my phone away and pick up a mop. As I was ringing out, a frazzled Mary came rushing up to me. Her face was panic-stricken and slightly pale. Something was wrong. "Jill, my asshole ex just called. He was letting Jeremy play Superman at home." "Superman?" She sighed. I could tell this had been a point of contention before. The asshole ex lets him jump off the top bunk into a pile of pillows. Anyway, Jeremy landed on his arm funny, and the asshole ex thinks he may have broken it. They're off to urgent care right now. I have to meet them there. "Of course," I said. "Should we close up, or—" "I can't close early. Mr. Adamian would kill me if he found out we did." She sighed. "Can I trust you to close up the shop tonight? I can give you the alarm codes and keys." Her face was pleading as intensely as her words. I saw the worried mum look in her eyes, and my heart softened. "Of course. Go be with your kid." "Oh my God, thank you, I owe you big." "It's family stuff, no worries." She gave me a quick hug and whispered, "I can't trust anyone else. You're the only one here going places, present company included." "Not true," I said, smiling. "You're going to be with your baby." She gave me a friendly smile. "Thank you. You're a hero." She ran back to her office to gather her things. As soon as she was out of sight, Doug sidled up to me. He nodded toward Mary's office. "What did live, laugh, love want with you?" I grinned. "She put me in charge for the night." Doug laughed. "Fuck, dog. This whole place is going to go up in flames then." "Shut up," I said, punching his arm. "How come she picked you? She should have picked me," he said, frowning. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Doug feigned offense. "Shit. If I ran this place, I'd have us going toe-to-toe with Taco Bell in 2 weeks. People be beating down the doors to get our Sopa de Awesomes and Sombrero taco boxes." "Uh-huh. And once I launched our new mascot, Mr. Taco, shit, we're rolling in dough." Or tortillas, as it were, before adding, "And Mr. Taco, that's the best name you got." Got to keep the name simple for Americans. We're simple people. Check this, though. Mr. Taco would have a huge sombrero and those bullet things across his chest. But instead of bullets, they'd be little tacos. Pretty slick, right? The taco guy would have smaller tacos as decorations in a world of living, breathing tacos. Wouldn't those little tacos be baby tacos? Kind of fucked up. Doug. Jill's right. The name needs work, Jenna said, joining us by the nacho station. I know branding and Mr. Taco doesn't cut it. When I started my GRWM videos, I started calling them Watch a Bitch Glow Up to stand out. I gained 200 followers overnight. 'Cause you were showing off the curves, Jenna. You got it easy. Jenna laughed. Easy? You try coming up with compelling daily content to satisfy thousands of parasocial stans. Boobs and ass can only take you so far. To that end, maybe Mr. Taco needs a lady friend. Senorita Carnitas. Ooh, I like that, Jenna said. Name's better too. Doug waved us off. Man, you'll overthink things. Mr. Taco don't need a lady. He's too wild to be tamed. He's got that iconic Ronald McDonald energy. For real. Kids would be taking photos and shit with him, drawing pictures. I'd probably win awards for creating him. Let's get a normie's view on this, Jenna said. Hey, Reggie, what do you think of Mr. Taco? The quiet guy just shrugged his shoulders. Doug nodded. See? He knows it's fire. Good shit, Reg. And y'all ain't even heard about Taco Land yet. It's full of kick-ass characters. Before I could further explore the origins of Taco Land, is that where Chester is located? Mary came back into the kitchen with her purse on her shoulder and keys clutched in her hands. She called everyone over and sighed. Look, my kid hurt himself and I have to go. Jill is in charge while I'm gone. What she says goes. If she tells me you guys made her life hell, so help me God, I will have you cleaning the grease traps for a week. Am I clear? Everyone nodded. Mary turned to me and placed her hand on my shoulder. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call or text, okay? Got ya. Thanks again. No worries, go see Jeremy. I know he needs his mum. Mary gave me a kind nod before blowing out of the shop. Seconds later, we saw her taillights speed down the road. I turned back to my staff and saw that all of them had pulled out their phones already. I wasn't upset. We were ahead in our cleaning, and the real boss was gone. At this point in the evening, we were just running down the clock anyway. I just prayed no fires broke out in the last few hours we were open. Seemed simple enough. About 20 minutes after Mary left, the restaurant's phone started ringing. It gave us all a shock. We'd never heard the phone ring in here before. Hell, Jenna admitted she'd actually never seen a landline in person before tonight. The phone was in Mary's office. Jenna, Doug and I made our way over there. Reggie was in his own world and we didn't bother him. Should I answer? I asked. You're the boss, Doug said. What if it's a supplier with questions about, I don't know, stock or something? No supplier is going to call a store at close to 10 o'clock at night, Jenna said. It could be Mr. Adamian, I said. What will you think if he called and Mary didn't answer? Just tell him she's taking a huge shit and she'll call him back, Doug said. Guarantee he won't ask any follow-up questions. Vile, Doug, Jenna said, her face twisting in disgust. I solve problems, Jenna. Sometimes that means going a vile route. Oh shit, vile route. That's a banger, Doug said, jotting the note into his lyric book. I'm gonna answer, I said. I walked into Mary's office and plucked the receiver up from the cradle. Hello? Hey, this is Paul over at Burgers Ahoy. Hi. If you want something, just come over and order. We're super slow. No thanks. I was calling to ask if you knew that you have a dude who's been standing at your drive-thru speaker for like 10 minutes. What? I asked, confused. When someone pulls up to the drive-thru speaker, a whole host of things happen. A timer starts, bells ring, and the staff jumps into action, but nothing ever sounded. The shop had been quiet. I told Paul as much. Well, we've been watching him for a while. He's just standing there. It's unsettling. What's going on? Who is it? Jenna asked. Paul from Burgers Ahoy. He says someone's been standing at the drive-thru speaker for 10 minutes. Why the fuck would he do that? Doug asked. You want me to send you a video? Give me your number and I'll text it over. It's so weird, Paul said. Hold up. Let me have someone check our monitors, I said. I turned to Doug, but was already heading that way. A few seconds later, I heard him yell back that there wasn't anything on the screen. I told Paul, I don't know what to tell you. Everyone here sees it. He's wearing a long black trench coat and, I don't know, those old hats from, like, the 1930s. A derby, I think. I gave Paul my number and told him to send me the video. I got the number to Burgers Ahoy and told him I'd call him back as soon as we watched it. He told us to be safe and hung up. A few seconds later, my phone dinged. I had a new text message. Hold up, Jenna said, pulling out her phone. I am 100% taking video of all of this. Ghost things go nuts on TikTok. Doug, call Reggie in here, I said. I don't know, man. That dude gives me the squirmy squiggles and shit. Maybe he's the haunted one. Come on, he's new and shy. You remember what it was like being the new guy here. He relented and went to grab Reggie. Once we were all back in the room, I pressed play on the video. The first image was the bright, pirate-themed interior of Burgers Ahoy. Doug snorted. They need a mascot too. Let me guess, Mr. Burger, Reggie said to our surprise. We all laughed. Score one for the new guy, Jenna said, elbowing his arm. Reggie blushed. Okay, so like I was saying, Paul said on the video, this dude has just been standing by the speaker for 10 minutes, not moving, not ordering, just standing and like looking all old and shit. Another employee at Burgers Ahoy yelled, "Oh man, the taco place done have a ghost." The video was shaky and got worse as Paul zoomed in. Jenna let out an annoyed sigh. Get some basic camera control, will you, Burger Boy? Once the image of our drive-thru came into focus, we all gasped. Sure enough, there was a man standing right next to our drive-thru speaker. He looked just like Paul said, wearing a long black trench coat and a derby hat. We all jumped when the office phone started ringing again. After the initial scare, we all started laughing. Even Reggie smiled. I picked up. Well, was I lying? Paul asked. No, that's pretty weird. One of you should go check it out, he said. Absolutely not, I said. Not in a million years, dude. What's he saying? Doug asked. He said someone should go check it out. Oh my God, Jenna said. My thoughts exactly. If you go, you need to record it for my page, Jenna added. Yo, tag me in the description. I'm your Thado father. There were 2 Thado fathers, I asked. Yeah, and the fake Doug father got 0 bars. Do you want me to go out with you? Paul asked. I'm curious. When did we decide I was going out? I said into the speaker. You're the boss lady, Doug said. And you're the nicest and the least threatening, Jenna added. I'd skip it, Reggie said. Not worth the trouble. Whatever, new guy. Vote's 2-1. You gotta go. I don't get a vote, I asked. Come on, Jill. Can't make the Mass Tacos crew seem like a bunch of bitches, Doug said. I'll keep an eye on Jenna. Reggie will keep an eye on Reggie. You keep an eye and, more importantly, the camera on the ghost, Doug said. It's win-win, girl. I looked up at them and sighed. Paul heard and sighed back. If it helps, I drew the short straw too, he said. Manager's got to manage all situations, right? I'm just temping as manager, and nowhere does it say I have to go confront creepy weirdos standing motionless in the drive-thru line. I know, but I keep circling back to what happens at the end of our shifts, if this guy is still there. My guess is we both work with some people who aren't dealing from a full deck, Paul confided to me. That said, I don't want to see any of them get hurt. Fuck. He had me there. I didn't want to see that either. Is the guy still there? He's not showing up on our screens. Julie, is the guy still... Oh, okay. Yeah, he's still there. Meet me in between the restaurants and we'll walk over together. If you try anything, I have mace, and I'm not above kicking a guy in the dick. Paul laughed. Save that energy for the ghost guy. We hung up. My crew looked at me and there was genuine excitement in their eyes. I couldn't blame him. This was easily the most engaging thing that's happened to Mas Tacos since we introduced the churro shake. Okay, I started. I'm meeting Paul from Burgers Ahoy and we're going to go check on this guy. If anything happens, please call the police and then Mary. Jenna held out her phone. I'm entrusting Sasha to you. Please get good footage. No shaky shit like your burger boy. I took her phone. He's not my burger boy. Maybe you should stay away, Reggie said. Where was this energy earlier? I asked, throwing up my hands. You ever dealt with anything like this before? Reggie asked. Have any of you? Oh shit, are you the little boy from the Sixth Sense? Jenna said. We all laughed, but it was more from nerves than the zinger. I've had some weird shit happen to me before. It could attach itself to you. Don't listen to the new guy, Doug said. This could blow up online. A haunted taco shop. Shit, mister. Taco and Taco Land might become a reality if this hits. Just keep an eye on the monitor, I said. I'll record that so we can combine videos later, Doug said. He put his 2 hands together and formed a circle. Symbolic shit, he said with a cocksure grin. I think you mean symbiotic, I said, standing near the side door. Whatever English textbook, go meet a ghost. I walked out into the crisp fall night and felt a chill wrap around my body. I rubbed my arms with my hands and thought about anything warm. As I took a few steps away from the restaurant, the smell of burnt hair stung my nostrils. I gave my outfit a quick sniff, but it wasn't me. Before I could explore further, I caught my first glimpse of Paul heading over. He was a lanky boy with swept-over brown hair. He had on an old, faded hoodie that clung to his body. Paul had a baby face, but I didn't hate it. From this distance, I enjoyed the view. Paul clocked me and gave me a small, friendly wave. I waved back and walked over to him. He was cute in an aw shucks kind of way. I dug him. Maybe there was a silver lining to all this nonsense after all. "Sorry if this ruins your night," he said, "but it was really freaking us out." No, it's okay. How often do you get to see a ghost up close?" "It may not be a ghost," Paul offered. "We can't see him on our cameras." "Well, we don't have to get that close. Let's just confirm he's there and head back." "Then what?" He shrugged. "Call the Ghostbusters?" I laughed. "I have a proton pack in my car if things get crazy." "Just don't cross the streams, huh?" That cemented my little growing crush. I might have to stop by Burgers Ahoy more often. In fact, I might be the only customer they have that entire day. We made our way over to the side of our building and started inching along the wall. We passed the second drive-thru window, and I peeked inside. Jenna, Doug, and Reggie were watching me on the security cameras. I remembered to pull up Jenna's camera and pressed record. I aimed it at Paul. "Paul, do you have anything to say before we encounter the dead?" "Yes, Jill. Please buy me a churro shake after this, for my troubles." I laughed. "If we survive, I'll give you one, free of charge." "I don't think Mr. Adamian will appreciate you giving stuff away. I gave a homeless guy an unpicked-up DoorDash order once, and he threatened to fire me." I stopped walking. "Wait, Mr. Adamian owns Burgers Ahoy and Mass Tacos. That man sure knows how to pick 'em." "We all have faults. Me, I like bad horror movies. Mr. Adamian, the man loves failing off-brand fast food franchises. Maybe the Bank of Chester is funding his addiction." "Where is Chester anyway?" "I thought it was a person," I said excitedly. Before we could continue our back and forth, an electric popping sound filled our ears, and the entire strip lost power, plunging us into darkness. Out of instinct, I leaned against the building, trying to hide. Paul joined me in hugging the wall. "What the hell?" he whispered. I don't know." Bang, bang, bang. Someone beat on the glass of the drive-thru window. I let out a scared yelp before I reached my hands up and snatched it back into my throat. Someone pulled open the window. It was Doug. "Doug, what the hell?" "Jill, the power went out." "I know. You scared the hell out of me." "We saw the ghost. It looked just like your burger boy said it did," Jenna yelled from behind him. "Burger boy?" Paul said. I ignored him. "Where did you see it?" "On the drive-thru screen. He looked at us before the power went out." "What?" "He looked pissed off," Doug unhelpfully added. "Fantastic," I whispered. "Is everyone okay?" "I'm chilling. Jenna was freaking out, but she's okay." "And Reggie?" "Huh, yo, Reg the Sledge, you feeling okay?" Reggie didn't respond. Doug yelled again, but the result was the same. My team had lost a team member in the 10 minutes I was away from them. Mary's job is so much harder than it seems. I sighed. "Where did he go?" "Maybe we should head back," Paul started, but the catching of the drive-thru menu lights returning to life cut him off. They were the only lights that came back on. We cheated off the wall and craned our necks toward the light like moths looking for a fix. Our jaws dropped. Reggie was standing there. "Reggie, what are you doing?" They're back," he said, his voice trembling. I can't move." The lights went out again. Everything around us went still. The smell of burnt hair filled the surrounding air. I twisted around to see if there was something behind us, but only saw Doug and Jenna fighting for window space. I turned back to a very confused Paul. "Do you smell?" "Ramp, ramp, ramp." A booming bass rained down on us. Time stood still. I felt the push from the sound wave ripple across my body. The force caused me to stumble to one knee. I clamped my hands on my ears to block out the bellowing, but it was in vain. I felt my eardrums vibrate and begin squealing. This was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. The drive-thru menu lights exploded, shooting glass shards at a terrified and exposed Reggie. He raised his hands to block the glass. In the last flashes of light, I saw jagged red cuts open up on his pale white skin. With that, we were in the dark again. Through my hand-muffed ears, I heard a high-pitched jolt of sound blow out and shatter every piece of glass in a 20-foot radius. The Mas Tacos drive-thru window cracked into 3 large pieces and fell to the ground. It shattered into glass rubble. With the barrier to the restaurant gone, I clearly heard Jenna's horrified screams. Doug was yelling something, but the sky's soundtrack made it impossible to hear. I shut my eyes. Mary had never warned me about this. The rumbling from the sky was so intense, I felt my bones rattle and my innards quake. I let out a scream my ancestors could hear. It too became lost to the soundscape. Seconds later, the booming call from the gods came to a rapid crescendo before dropping out completely. There wasn't even an echo. The only noise I heard was the last gasps of my throat-cracking scream. My voice finally died out, and I collapsed onto the ground. I couldn't find my breath, and panic quickly set in. In a flash, I sat up and gasped for air like a dying goldfish. When I finally captured my foe and took several huge gulps, once I avoided death. I threw up my dinner. I remember seeing an ant near the pile and thinking, well, dude, that should set you up for the year. When I finally got my wits about me, I pushed up and got to my unsteady feet. I noticed Paul had also collapsed to the ground. He slowly stood up and shook away the cobwebs. It didn't work. His eyes looked wild and shock froze his face. His mind had cracked like a tree zapped with lightning. He was trapped under the trunk. Panic was setting in. I reached out and grabbed his hand. It was clammy and cold in my grip. We locked eyes and I started speaking, but nothing came out. My voice was shot. I coughed to clear my throat. Nothing happened at first, but when my body remembered to make saliva, it cleared up the alphabet jam in my mouth. "We're alive," I croaked out as I grabbed his shoulders. "I'm here and we're alive." His eyelids lowered, and you could see his body purge the fear from his system. Beads of sweat covered his face, and he wiped his brow with the back of his free hand. Both hands were shaking. I remembered I was still holding him, but instead of letting go, I gave him a slight squeeze, reminding him he wasn't alone. I found it calming as well, a human connection in an alien world. Doug's screaming finally broke through. I turned back to see him frantically pointing at the sky. I looked up and saw a kaleidoscope of bright, colorful lights shifting and swirling above us. It was mesmerizing. It reminded me of paint meeting water, darkening and swirling, no pattern to follow. Jenna was screaming as well. Without hearing her words, I knew what she wanted. I reached around me and found her phone. I hit record and aimed it up at the sky. Her screen captured the electric northern lights as they danced above us. There wasn't a single sound emanating from this craft. It just hovered in the sky and showed us the most incredible Christmas light display any of us have ever seen. "This must be what you see before you die," I said out loud, but not meaning to. "One can hope," Paul answered, mesmerized. I realized we were still holding hands. I glanced over at Paul and noticed blotches of red on his face. It wasn't bloody cuts like Reggie had sustained, but more like a sunburn. Oh shit, Reggie. Where was he? "Reggie!" I screamed. No response. I ran over to where he'd been standing, once again catching a whiff of something burning. Hair or some chemical. A horrid thought filled my brain. Is that Paul's skin burning or my own? From behind me, I heard Paul walk over. When I got to the drive-thru speaker, there was no sight of Reggie, but the smell of burnt hair hung heavy in the air. I waved it away from my face and called out to him again. "Reggie!" He wasn't there. "Where did he go?" Paul asked, joining me. They must have taken him." "Who's they? What the hell is going on?" "Yo, behind you," Doug yelled from the window. In the shadows of the drive-thru landscaping, we saw 3 figures crouched in the darkness of the nearby bushes. The burnt hair smell wafted heavily from their direction. They didn't move an inch, even after Doug outed them. Paul took a nervous step back. "This shit ain't worth 12 an hour." I reached back and grabbed his arm, cementing him in place. "You can't leave me here." A crinkling sound emerged from the bushes. A rhythmic clicking answered the crinkles. 2 of the figures in the bushes moved slightly. The crinkling and clicking became more rapid, almost as if these 2 things were arguing. They went quiet again. The bushes shook, and the silent 3rd figure walked out. My eyes caught the growing intensity of the busted drive-thru light bulbs re-illuminating. They were back from the dead. The shattered filament emitters provided enough light to expose what this thing really looked like. It was the Derby man. Up close, what we assumed had been a ghost was, in truth, an actual creature. It appeared to be a man from the 1930s, but it was impossible to distinguish any specific facial features. It was an unfinished drawing. From afar, it was a person. Up close, though, that melted away. It hit the right notes, sure, but the song was off. At that moment, the idea of the uncanny valley came crashing into my frontal cortex. We fear things that look like us, but aren't us. This thing wasn't us, not at all. Paul reached for my hand and found it. We didn't move. Hell, we hardly breathed. The Derby man took another step toward us. The closer he got, the more abnormal he looked. His face shared the same swirling watercolor paint that was saw in the sky. I remember thinking, why was he dressed like Philip Marlowe? In a flash, I wondered if the last time these things were here was during that era. His clothing would have blended in then, but now made him stand out. He came back, assuming he could mimic us, and discovered we'd changed. "The fuck is this?" Paul asked, his voice wavering. He tightened his grip. The thing before us chittered and crinkled, as if it was responding in a tongue neither of us knew. It took a step toward Paul, and I felt his body brace to run. I squeezed his hand, a subtle reminder we were attached. "Don't make any sudden movements," I cautioned. "We don't know what they want." The Derby man stood in front of Paul. It looked him up and down. It reached into the pocket of the trench coat and pulled out a small, handheld device. At first blush, we both thought it was a weapon. Then a puff of smoke burst out and settled around us. It smelled like burnt hair and freshly cooked donuts. At any other time, these two concurrent smells would repulse anyone, but at this moment, they smelled amazing. My body relaxed. The tips of my fingers and toes went numb. I had to remember to squeeze Jenna's phone tight or else I would have dropped it. Oh my God, I still had her phone. It was still recording. I swallowed hard and tried to not let on that I was doing anything clandestine. I wasn't sure what I had captured up to this point, but I knew that Jenna's follower count was about to swell like a tick on a sleeping dog. The creature twisted its hand, and a glass lens appeared. The Derby man punched a few buttons, and a red horizontal laser shot out the front. Paul flinched but stayed put. The laser scanned him from head to toe and then winked out. The Derby man crinkled, chittered, and clicked at us. Maybe it said something profound, but I'll never know. It sounded like birds in the woods to me. Seconds later, the Derby man shook as if seizures gripped his body. It ripped off the clothes it had been wearing. Its body wasn't human. He was a Ken doll. Paul and I both took a few steps back, wondering if this thing was going to explode. Would it attack, kidnap us like it had Reggie? Instead, the tearing of flesh filled the air. Rips opened up across the watery painted face and down his human-looking skin. Blood spurt from burst open veins. That's when it hit me. It was shedding. The husk landed on the cement with a wet slap. Seconds later, the lump of blobby skin dissolved into nothing. We turned our attention back to the creature. The bloody pulp moved around, and a new form emerged from the ether. It looked exactly like Paul. The thing chittered again. His voice had deepened. They pressed another button, and the musky donut smell dissipated. My mind cleared, and the terror I'd been feeling rushed into the void. The two beings that had been hiding in the bushes emerged. One looked strikingly like Reggie, the other like me. My body went liquid, and I started to faint. I stumbled, but Paul caught me before I split my head open on the road. The two human puppets joined their pal in front of us. The smell of burnt hair was overwhelming. They clicked and chittered for a minute before another ear-splitting boom erupted above our heads. A flash of white light above us was so intense it made our little section of the strip mall look like noon. I shut my eyes and covered my ears again. The ringing boom ended as quickly as it had begun. I opened my eyes and beheld a new world. It looked like ours, but felt changed. Uncanny Valley, I thought. I'd laid eyes on something I wasn't supposed to see, and I felt like I was waking from a long, detailed dream. The figures were gone. A naked and befuddled Reggie was in their place. He didn't look injured, save for several minor cuts on his arms and face. I noticed an intricate pattern of 7 triangles across his thigh. At a glance, I thought it was a tribal tattoo, but then I clocked they were scars. 6 were old, and the 7th was oozing blood. It clicked in that moment that Reggie had seen these guys before. He'd tried to tell me earlier, but I wasn't hearing what he had been saying. I ran to him and shook him. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at me in a haze. "Are you okay?" I asked. It happened again, didn't it? Though Paul was struggling with what had happened, he had enough sense to peel off his hoodie and hand it to Reggie. "You look cold." Reggie thanked him and put it on. "I'm sorry I brought this on to you all." "What happened?" "They always come back." Jenna and Doug burst out of the door and rushed over to us. They were both jabbering, but it came at us as another wave of noise. Over it, I heard Doug rambling through all the things we just experienced and Jenna begging for her phone. I felt it in my hand. Without thinking, I handed it to her. "What the hell?" she said. "What?" I finally asked. "Nothing recorded. It shows a file but says it's corrupted." "They do that," Reggie said. "I've never been able to capture them." "Well, that sucks," Jenna said. I gave her a look and she softened. Sorry, Reggie, here. I grabbed you a towel. We only had hand towels. It didn't cover everything but the important bits. We helped him up off the ground and formed a little wall around him to give him some privacy. Oh shit, Doug said. The fuck happened there? He was staring at the Bank of Chester. A thick layer of raised black soot decorated the bricks. The soot formed the same pattern that was marked on Reggie's thigh. The spaces between the pattern appeared washed out, as if the sun had faded the stone. Mr. Adamian is going to be pissed, Doug said. The fury at what Mr. Adamian might think was the last thing on my mind. Doug approached the wall to touch the soot, but a stern yelp from Jenna stopped him in his tracks. What if it's poisonous, idiot? True, he said sheepishly. They helped escort Reggie back into the restaurant. Paul and I stared at each other. There was so much to say, but the words couldn't find the way out. Eventually, I found my voice. So, it wasn't a ghost. He laughed. Don't have to worry about making that call to Egan now. Just the men in black, I suppose. Are you okay? He asked. Not really. You? No, I think I'm going to close the store early. Same, I said. Do you want to talk about this over coffee? I was thinking a stiff drink or 10. I laughed. Know a place? Yeah, I'll text you the address, he said. I should get back and see how my people are doing. Burgers ahoy, I said, instantly regretting it. Burgers ahoy, he repeated with a small smile. He gave me a little wave as he left. I walked back towards Mas Tacos and started laughing, not because anything was funny, far from it, but because my mind and body didn't know how to respond to so much simultaneous stimuli. I was a mess, sure, and dreaded the future conversations with Mary about what had gone down tonight, but I was moving forward, and that's all I could ask of myself at the moment. There'd be a realization, tears and nightmares later, but I wasn't letting that get to me. I was in survival mode. Keep marching. Work now, cry later. The smell of burnt hair filled my nostrils again. I turned back and scanned the shadows, but nothing stood out. I listened for either chittering or clicking and heard neither. In my gut, I knew they were still here, watching, waiting, taking stock of us. How had we responded? Would we fight them? Which of us would be the next Reggie? Thrift shopping had always been a sort of ritual for my wife and me. We'd hit up estate sales, thrift stores, garage sales, even old shops on their last legs, picking up whatever caught our eye to breathe new life into our home. Nearly everything around us had a story, things that, in their quiet way, had been through someone else's life before they became part of ours. Cookware, furniture, our daughter's toys, clothes, it didn't matter. If it was well made and had some years left, it was good enough for us. Growing up the way we did, my wife and I both learned early on not to waste anything. We weren't poor now, not by a long shot, but when you've spent your childhood stretching every dollar, that waste not mentality never fully leaves. It's more than a habit, it's instinct. I'd become something of a hawk for deals, tracking social media for those inevitable posts about local stores closing down, big sales, liquidations, anything with a shot at uncovering a hidden gem. It was like a hobby. And that's how I found out about the toy store. An old post, buried deep on the community page, announced the auction of a local toy shop that had been a fixture in the town since the Great Depression. The place was special. I'd been there once as a kid, and I remembered the almost magical feeling of the store, the smell of old wood and varnish, the glint of paint on row after row of handmade toys. This wasn't your usual toy store. The owner, an older man everyone knew as Mr. Winslow, had poured his life into every toy, carving and painting each one by hand. Wooden soldiers, miniature dollhouses, delicate puzzles. Everything you could imagine. He never imported a single thing, and every toy had a strange, vintage charm that you couldn't find anywhere else. Mr. Winslow and his wife had run the shop right up until they died, years apart. They didn't have any family left. So the state had seized the property, and now they were auctioning everything off, right down to the last hand-carved toy. The sale was on a cold, grey Saturday. I convinced my wife it'd be worth checking out, maybe picking up a few toys for our daughter. The place was in rough shape, dim and drafty. Half the lights didn't work, and the smell of dust lingered heavy in the air, clinging to everything like a veil. But the toys, they were immaculate. Each shelf was still filled with tiny wooden faces, frozen in mid-expression, each toy glancing out at us wide-eyed and almost expectant. The crowd at the auction was familiar, dotted with faces I'd seen at sales like this before. Liquidation sales bring out a certain kind of person. You can always tell who's a regular and who's new to the scene just by watching them bid. The newcomers hesitate, test the waters before committing to any serious bid. But the regulars, the seasoned ones, they've got a rhythm. They know exactly how high to go, exactly when to pull back. Most of them aren't there to pick up keepsakes. They're there to flip it all for a profit online. In most liquidation sales, they bundle the goods in bulk, which suits the resellers just fine. You see a table stacked with, say, 100 of the same porcelain vase or unopened action figure. People bid on the lot. The highest bidder picks their fill, and then the next one steps up. It's efficient. By the end, whatever's left just goes for the average bid price. First come, first serve. But Mr. Winslow's toy store wasn't your average liquidation. No one was here for bulk toys from China, and no one was going to find a stack of hot-ticket items like last season's electronics. Every item was unique, handcrafted, and individually priced. There wasn't a single barcode in the building, not a plastic wrapper in sight. Every toy was a labor of love, something that had been sanded, painted, and assembled by hand. It was like stepping into a time capsule, each piece carrying a bit of the old man's life and passion. The toys looked like relics from another era, wooden horses with faded paint, lines of tin soldiers standing rigid, delicate porcelain dolls with blank, glassy eyes. There were marionettes on thin, tangled strings, and intricate dollhouses with hand-painted wallpaper and tiny furniture inside. Toys made for another world, another life. Most of the people there took one look and left early, their disinterest written all over their faces. These weren't things that would sell for much online, and with the store's gloomy atmosphere and the unsettling shadows cast by the dim light, I didn't blame them. But I was in it for more than a quick sale. I'd come to find a treasure, maybe something special to put on a shelf for our daughter, or a keepsake to remind me of a place that had been in the town forever. So I stayed, wandering the aisles, running my fingers along the toys' edges, feeling the worn, chipped paint under my fingers. The auction had turned out to be a bust. I wandered around the store one last time, eyeing the shelves filled with dusty old toys, and I was just about ready to leave empty-handed when my daughter tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy, look!" She pointed to a battered old toy box shoved in a corner. Sitting upright inside it, propped against the side like she'd been carefully placed there, was a plush doll. But this wasn't just any stuffed toy. The doll was eerily life-sized, just about the same height as my daughter, in fact. It had stringy blonde hair that cascaded messily down its shoulders, two large button eyes stitched onto a cloth face, and a stitched-on smile that seemed just a little too wide, curling up at the edges in a way that didn't quite feel right. The doll wore a faded black dress with lace trimming, adding to its peculiar charm. My daughter rushed over, her face lighting up with excitement. She plucked the doll from the toy box and hugged it tightly, like she'd found a long-lost friend. "Her name is Dolly," she declared, squeezing the doll with the kind of fierce, unfiltered affection only a child can muster. I looked at the doll more closely, a little unsettled by its fixed, button-eyed stare and that odd smile that seemed to follow me even as I shifted from side to side. There was something strange about its proportions, almost as if it had been crafted specifically to look like a child, but not quite. The auctioneer, clearly tired of a morning spent trying to hawk dusty old toys to an uninterested crowd, noticed my interest and gave a half-hearted wave. "Take it if you want," he said with a shrug. "Ain't nobody bidding on this junk. Most of it's headed for the dump. You find anything else you like, feel free to pick through it. Won't cost you more than a few dollars." The truth was, there wasn't anything else in that store I wanted, and after an auctioneer calls the merchandise garbage, it's a good hint to leave. I paid him a few dollars for Dolly, who was now practically glued to my daughter's side. She clutched the doll's hand, looking at me with a beaming grin that melted any lingering doubts I might have had. As we left, I noticed that my daughter was oddly quiet. Normally, she'd chatter all the way home, talking about every little thing she saw, but this time, she just held Dolly close, staring out the window with a sort of distant expression, almost like she was listening. It was subtle, but it was there. I chalked it up to the thrill of her new toy and figured she was probably just imagining adventures for Dolly, weaving stories in her head like she often did. Still, something felt strange. I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll's stitched-on eyes were watching me, even as I drove, catching glimpses of it in the rearview mirror. And though my daughter was silent, there was a sort of tension in the car, a quiet that seemed to settle in like a chill. We pulled into the driveway, and I glanced back at my daughter, who was still holding Dolly, her fingers entwined with the doll's soft fabric hand. She looked up at me with a serene smile. "She really likes it here, Daddy," she whispered, as if Dolly herself had somehow told her. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I told myself I was just being paranoid. After all, it was just a doll, a cheap, old-fashioned plush left over in a toy store no one cared about. But as we stepped inside, I couldn't help feeling we'd brought something else home with us that day, something that had been waiting patiently in that dusty corner, in a forgotten store full of discarded things. And now it had found a new place to belong. In the weeks that followed, my daughter's attachment to Dolly grew into an obsession. At first, my wife and I thought it was adorable. Kids have imaginary friends all the time, right? And if she wanted to treat Dolly as her special friend, that seemed harmless enough. At any given moment, you could find my daughter playing with Dolly. She held tea parties for the two of them, setting up our good china in tiny rows on her play table. Dolly always had the seat of honor, perched across from my daughter, her button eyes staring straight ahead, her strange stitched smile ever present. When it wasn't tea parties, it was school. My daughter would line up her other stuffed animals, but Dolly was always in the front row, right under her watchful eye. I'd hear her talking to Dolly, sometimes even scolding her in a low, serious voice, like she was dealing with a difficult student. She'd talk with Dolly while watching TV, telling her all the things that were happening on the screen as if the doll was hanging onto every word. We chalked it up to a vivid imagination. But soon, things started to feel different. I noticed my daughter no longer touched any of her other toys. They lay scattered around her room, gathering dust. Her entire world revolved around Dolly. One evening, we sat down for dinner. It was spaghetti night, my daughter's favorite, and my wife had gone all out. We called her to the table, expecting her to leave Dolly behind like usual. But tonight, she walked into the dining room, gripping Dolly by the arm, and carefully set her down on the chair next to her. "Can Dolly have a plate too?" she asked, her voice full of a strange kind of insistence. My wife and I exchanged a glance, an uneasy one. We both shrugged it off and played along, thinking it was just a phase. My wife set an empty plate in front of Dolly, miming a spoonful of spaghetti onto it with a playful smile. But our daughter's face fell, her expression crumpling as she stared down at the empty plate in front of Dolly. "She needs real food, Mum," she said, her voice small and hurt. "Honey, she gets special pretend food because she's a pretend person," my wife explained gently, trying to meet her halfway. My daughter's expression twisted into something dark and angry, a look we'd never seen from her before. Her face flushed, and her eyes filled with tears as she screamed, "No! Dolly hasn't eaten in decades! She's hungry!" The words came out in a wail, raw and full of a desperate, gut-wrenching emotion that seemed so out of place. It was as if she was pleading for a real, living person, as though Dolly's hunger was a tangible, undeniable fact. She grabbed the doll, cradling it protectively as if we had wronged it, her face red with frustration and hurt. When we tried to calm her down, she started kicking, screaming, inconsolable. She clung to Dolly, her knuckles turning white, her small voice rising in a frantic, guttural cry that we'd never heard from her before. Eventually, we had no choice but to pick her up, gently prying her from Dolly's side. She thrashed and shouted as we carried her to her room, leaving Dolly alone at the kitchen table. As I closed her bedroom door, my heart still pounding from the outburst, I found myself staring back at the dining room. There sat Dolly, her button eyes unblinking, her crooked smile staring straight ahead as if mocking me. The room felt quiet, too quiet, and as I stood there, I could have sworn I saw the faintest twitch in Dolly's stitched mouth. A subtle shift, as if she was smiling just a bit wider. I shook it off, forcing myself to laugh at the absurdity of it. It was just a doll, just fabric and stuffing. But as I turned out the kitchen light, leaving Dolly in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, she was still watching me. It took a long time to calm our daughter down. She kept sniffling, wiping at her nose. and muttering how unfair it was that Dolly hadn't been given food. She clutched at her pajamas, her small fists trembling with frustration and sorrow, saying she just wanted Dolly to be happy. My wife, always the peacemaker, gave me a gentle nudge. "Just get the doll, please," she whispered, glancing back at our daughter. "It'll help her calm down." I nodded, reluctantly heading back to the kitchen, feeling a strange knot forming in my stomach. As I walked into the room, an odd chill seeped into my skin, making me pause at the doorway. Dolly wasn't where we'd left her. We had set her at the dinner table, facing her empty plate, exactly where my daughter had insisted. But now she was turned in her chair, her body rotated to face down the hallway that led to my daughter's room. Her button eyes seemed to glint in the dim light, her crooked smile somehow looking sharper, hungrier. I shook my head, brushing off the unsettling feeling as a trick of the light. It was just a doll. Maybe the chair had shifted when my daughter thrashed in the dining room, and in the chaos, I just hadn't noticed. I picked Dolly up, her fabric cold against my skin, and carried her back to my daughter's room. I stepped inside, and the moment my daughter saw Dolly in my hands, her face lit up, her eyes going wide with relief and joy. She jumped up, practically launching herself at me to grab her beloved doll. The way she held Dolly, it was like she was reuniting with a real friend, someone she'd been separated from for a lifetime. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, clutching Dolly tightly, pressing her cheek against the doll's button-eyed face. My wife sat beside her on the bed, running her fingers through our daughter's hair, soothing her. As the tension in the room faded, my daughter murmured something, barely a breath. "What did you say, sweetie?" I asked, leaning closer. She looked up at me, her face soft and serene, and repeated it, her voice clear. "Dolly's full now." A shiver ran through me, but before I could think too much of it, she broke into a grin, her usual playful energy returning. "Can I watch TV now?" My wife shot me a confused glance but quickly regained her composure. "After you eat your dinner, okay?" Our daughter nodded, happily returning to the dining room to finish her meal. She didn't ask about Dolly's food, didn't protest or insist on setting an extra plate. She ate without complaint, chattering occasionally about her favorite cartoons. The strange outburst over Dolly seemed forgotten, almost as if it hadn't happened at all. After dinner, she padded off to the living room and settled in front of the TV, Dolly perched beside her, her tiny hands still wrapped around the dolls. We exchanged wary glances, but neither of us dared speak the questions lingering in our minds. The quiet in the house had returned, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. That night, there were no more whispers about Dolly being hungry, no more outbursts or demands for extra plates at the table. My wife and I, unsure of what to make of it, decided to let it go. Whatever had happened, our daughter was calm, happy even, and if Dolly had something to do with that, well, we weren't about to argue with a win. That night, after we'd tucked our daughter into bed and cleaned up the kitchen, my wife and I sat together at the dining room table, mulling over the evening's strange events. "She's 8 now," my wife said, her voice low, like she didn't want to risk our daughter hearing, even though her room was on the other side of the house. "Isn't she a little old to be pretending a doll is, well, real?" I nodded, rubbing my temples. I was thinking the same thing. I mean, she did this before, but back when she was really little, 2 or 3 maybe, and even then it wasn't this intense. We'd both noticed that her behavior with Dolly was different than her usual flights of imagination. At that age, she'd had a few imaginary friends, nothing we worried about. She'd talk to her stuffed animals, play act scenarios. It was normal stuff. But now, with Dolly, her behavior seemed fervent. Like Dolly wasn't just a doll she liked, but something essential, almost sacred to her. "We could maybe take the doll away," I suggested, not liking the idea even as I said it. My wife shook her head. "If we just took Dolly, she'd be inconsolable, and honestly, I don't want another outburst like tonight. We'd have to handle it carefully." After a few minutes of back and forth, we came up with a plan. We'd gradually phase Dolly out. We'd get our daughter hooked on something new, a fun toy or play set she couldn't resist, and once she'd lost interest in Dolly, we'd quietly take the doll away while she was at school. But this plan was harder to execute than we thought. We spent the next week scouring stores for the latest toys, something we usually avoided given our thrift shop lifestyle. We bought dolls with accessories, elaborate play sets, building kits, anything we thought might catch her attention. We figured we'd splurge just this once if it meant keeping her happy and moving her away from Dolly. Yet, no matter what we brought home, she barely looked at the new toys. Her enthusiasm was tepid at best. She'd unwrap the new toy, inspect it with a polite sort of interest, and then inevitably wander back to wherever Dolly was waiting. My wife and I tried everything, even bringing home a new board game, hoping it'd be something we could play together as a family. But Dolly was always right there, tucked under my daughter's arm or seated by her side, a silent companion with her button eyes and stitched smile, watching us from across the table. Finally, in a last-ditch effort, we went out and bought her a tablet. We figured that with all the educational games, drawing apps, and videos at her fingertips, surely she'd be glued to it like most kids her age. But she barely gave it a second glance. "Thanks, Mum and Dad," she said when we handed it to her, but there was something distant in her eyes. She held Dolly close, almost protectively, her thumb tracing the doll's tiny hand. "But Dolly doesn't like tablets." The words, though innocent enough, sent a chill down my spine. It was like she was speaking not for herself, but on behalf of her doll, as though Dolly had a voice, an opinion, a preference. My wife and I exchanged worried glances. We'd tried everything, and it seemed our daughter's attachment to Dolly was only deepening. She barely even touched the new toys. They lay untouched in her room, some still in their boxes, collecting dust. With a heavy heart, we decided to go forward with our original plan. We would wait until she was at school, slip Dolly out of sight, and hope that, with enough new distractions around her, she'd find something else to latch onto. We both felt a pang of guilt. Seeing the joy Dolly brought her, the way her face lit up when she held the doll, made it hard to imagine taking that away. But our concern for her well-being outweighed everything else. So we waited, biding our time, and hoped that in Dolly's absence, our daughter would turn her attention to one of the other toys. But deep down, I had a feeling this wouldn't go as smoothly as we hoped. The night before we were set to pull off our plan, I had the strangest dream. At least I think it was a dream. I was lying in bed staring up at the ceiling when a chill crept over me. It felt like something was watching us, something cold and patient. I didn't want to look, but in the way dreams force you, I felt my eyes drift toward the end of the bed. There, just at the edge of my vision, was Dolly. She was standing up, perfectly still, her button eyes fixed on me. I couldn't make out any details, just her shadowy outline, a figure waiting silently, as if she had all the time in the world. Every time I tried to turn my head to look directly at her, she vanished, slipping back into the corner of my sight. When I woke up, my heart was pounding, my skin damp with cold sweat. I shook it off, trying to convince myself it was just the stress of the past few weeks getting to me. That morning, as planned, my wife took our daughter to school, distracting her with promises of a new game they'd play together that evening. The house felt unnaturally still once they were gone, a heavy silence that seemed to press against my skin. I took a deep breath, heading into my daughter's room, where Dolly was resting on her bed. Picking her up felt strange, like I was holding something more than just a doll. I avoided looking into those button eyes and quickly made my way to the pantry. I stuffed her into the top back corner, where my daughter wouldn't think to look, carefully positioning her behind a stack of canned goods. As expected, when my daughter came home and saw that Dolly was missing, all hell broke loose. The tantrum was unlike anything I'd ever seen. She stormed through the house, screaming, throwing things, demanding we give Dolly back. It was as if she was possessed by some uncontainable rage. Her small face twisted into an expression that was both heartbroken and furious. My wife and I tried to calm her down, to reason with her, but she wasn't listening. "Where's Dolly?" she shrieked, her voice hoarse from crying. "You'll regret this. Dolly's going to hurt you. She'll make you sorry. Give her back." Her words left a chill running through my veins. This wasn't our daughter speaking, not the sweet, gentle child we'd raised. She'd always been polite, soft-spoken, never the kind of kid who threw tantrums or even raised her voice much. But now, she seemed almost feral, her eyes wild with an intensity that was unnerving. The tantrum went on for hours, our daughter's screams echoing through the house until she finally wore herself out. With her voice raw and every tear shed, she collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and half asleep. My wife and I sat nearby, sharing exhausted, worried glances, feeling like we'd made a terrible mistake but unable to go back on our decision now. Once we were sure she was asleep, we carried her to her bed, laying her down gently and turning on her nightlight. We murmured soft good nights, though we made sure not to wake her. We thought the worst of it was over for the night, that we'd weathered the storm and could finally get a moment to breathe. But when we walked back into the living room, a chill settled over me, prickling the back of my neck. My heart dropped when I saw it. There, sitting on the couch in the exact spot where my daughter had just been sleeping, was Dolly. She sat upright, her button eyes fixed straight ahead, her stitched smile just a little too wide, too knowing. We stood there, frozen, staring at her in stunned silence. Neither of us had touched the doll since I'd hidden her in the pantry. There was no way she could have gotten back to the living room on her own. My wife reached out, her hand trembling, as if to pick Dolly up, but then thought better of it and pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself instead. I could feel the words I wanted to say caught in my throat. Instead, I moved forward slowly, as if approaching something dangerous, and took Dolly in my hands, her fabric cold and somehow heavier than before. I was careful not to look at her too closely, afraid that if I met those button eyes for too long, I'd see something I couldn't unsee. I brought her back to the pantry, stuffing her into the corner again, this time piling more cans in front of her, pushing them in tightly to make sure she wouldn't move. I left the pantry, shutting the door firmly behind me. When I returned to the living room, my wife was still standing there, her face pale. We didn't say a word. We just sat there in silence, the weight of that empty stitched smile lingering in the room. And as we sat there, I found myself thinking about my daughter's words, her warning echoing in my mind. Dolly's going to hurt you. She'll make you sorry. Bah. My wife and I sat on the couch, staring at each other, hearts pounding in our chests, with the realization that neither of us had moved Dolly from her hiding place in the pantry. We both knew it couldn't have been our daughter either. She'd been asleep the whole time. And yet, there was Dolly, sitting in the exact spot where our daughter had drifted off on the couch, like she'd claimed it as her own. "This is too much," my wife whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't want that doll in the house anymore. Please, just get rid of it." She looked at me with pleading eyes, and I couldn't blame her. Every logical part of me wanted to dismiss what was happening, but that feeling, that lingering chill creeping down my spine, told me it was best to listen. I didn't want Dolly here, either. Whatever this was, it needed to end. I scooped Dolly up, feeling that unnatural heaviness in her again, like she was almost pulling me back, as if the doll didn't want to leave. I ignored the way her stitched smile seemed to stretch just a little more as I turned toward the door, telling myself it was just a trick of my tired mind. I had to get her out. Outside, the early morning was eerily quiet. The community dumpster stood at the far end of the lot, and I made my way over, clutching Dolly tight, every step feeling more difficult than the last. A weight, like icy fingers, seemed to wrap around my shoulders, tendrils of dread clawing at my chest. It was ridiculous. I knew it was just a doll, but it felt like something was whispering in my ear, urging me to stop, to turn around, to take Dolly back inside. I shook it off, forcing myself to keep walking. When I reached the dumpster, I flung the lid open, staring into the dark, reeking void below. With a grimace, I tossed Dolly inside, hearing the muffled thud as she hit the bottom, then slammed the heavy lid shut with a sense of finality. As I walked back to the house, a small but persistent voice in my mind whispered that this wasn't over. But I pushed it down, reasoning that we'd done the right thing. Dolly was gone. Our daughter would be upset, but with some time she'd move on. The next morning, when our daughter woke up, her eyes darted around the room, searching, and she quickly realized Dolly was missing. Her face fell, and she looked up at me, desperation clouding her eyes. But this time, she was different. It was as though something in her understood, resigned and hurt. She didn't throw a tantrum. She didn't scream or demand Dolly back. She just sighed, shoulders slumped, and went about getting ready for school with a defeated sort of sadness. "Promise to be good, okay?" I said, brushing her hair out of her face as she sat at the breakfast table. She nodded, though her gaze was fixed somewhere distant, somewhere I couldn't follow. After we got her on the bus and my wife headed to work, I finally allowed myself to relax. Maybe we'd done it, I thought. Maybe we'd finally won the battle. I made myself a coffee, settled into my office, and powered up my laptop, planning to get some work done in the quiet house. The familiar hum of the computer and the routine of logging into emails and files felt comforting, ordinary. I let myself get lost in it, ignoring the lingering memories of the past few days, trying to embrace the calm. But then, just as I was settling in, I heard it. A soft, drawn-out creak, like someone slowly pushing the door open. My heart froze. I looked up from my screen, eyes darting to the door. It was open, just a crack, though I distinctly remembered shutting it when I'd sat down. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely more than a whisper, straining to listen for any sound in return. Nothing. A chill ran down my spine as I pushed back from my desk, rising slowly, my eyes locked on that narrow sliver of the door, as if expecting something to appear there. I took a cautious step forward, reaching out to push the door wider, my breath caught in my throat. And that's when I saw it. Sitting there just outside my office was Dolly. She was propped up in the hallway, her button eyes fixed on the door, her head tilted just slightly, as if she were studying me. That stitched smile, wider than I remembered, curved in an expression that was almost triumphant. I stumbled back, feeling my stomach twist as that dreadful realization settled over me. I'd thrown her away. I'd seen her hit the bottom of that dumpster, but here she was, back in my house, waiting, like she'd never left. Dolly sat there, covered in dirt, grime, and bits of garbage clinging to her black dress, her button eyes still fixed on me. For a moment I could only stare, paralyzed by disbelief and dread. I took a step back, not even noticing the wall behind me until my shoulders hit it. I had thrown her away. I had seen her at the bottom of that dumpster, and yet, here she was, sitting on my hallway floor, filthy and somehow more sinister than ever. Then, before I could even process what I was seeing, Dolly began to rise. Her small body lifted into the air, hovering just above the floor. The air felt thick, almost electric, like the whole house was holding its breath. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, in a rush, a series of images flashed through my mind. Terrible, twisted visions filled my head, screaming faces, dark, tangled forests, and a sense of looming, inescapable dread. The world around me seemed to fade away, swallowed by shadows. My vision blurred, and in the next instant, I was no longer standing in my hallway. I was in a forest, a dense, suffocating darkness pressing down on me from all sides. My heart pounded in my chest as I ran, my legs pumping through thick underbrush. My feet stumbled over roots and rocks, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. It was like being inside the worst kind of nightmare, but the terror was too real, too sharp to dismiss as mere fantasy. Something was behind me, chasing me. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and my blood ran cold. A massive beast, towering and monstrous, loped through the shadows, its movements fluid but unnatural, as if its joints were barely holding together. It looked like a wolf, but larger than any wolf I'd ever seen, with a gaping maw that stretched grotesquely across its face, almost as if it were barely attached by a thin hinge of jaw. Its eyes burned a bright, unsettling red, like twin buttons sewn deep into its skull, and its body was held together with thick, fraying threads, giving it a twisted, stitched appearance that reminded me horribly of Dolly. The beast let out a growl, and the sound was like 1,000 voices, guttural and inhuman. I stumbled, my legs giving out beneath me as I crashed to the forest floor. The rancid smell of decay filled the air as the creature loomed over me, its hot, foul breath washing over my face. It was like staring into the face of a nightmare made real, a vision of pure, unfiltered terror. I tried to push myself up, to run, but the beast was too fast. It lowered its massive head, bearing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth, each one as sharp as a dagger. I braced my arms against its maw, desperate to hold it back, but the beast was impossibly strong. Black, oily ichor dripped from its mouth, splattering onto my arms and chest, the stench nearly choking me. "This isn't real!" I shouted, my voice breaking with desperation. "Leave me alone!" But the creature's glowing red eyes narrowed, and I felt a crushing weight as it bore down on me. Its teeth sunk into my shoulder, sending a wave of agony tearing through my body. I screamed, the pain sharp and cold, a raw fire spreading through my veins. I could feel its teeth tearing into me, feel the slick heat of blood as it spilled down my side. With a surge of frantic energy, I brought my knee up, slamming it into the beast's chest, trying to shove it back, but it barely budged. The creature's maw twisted, a sick, twisted semblance of a grin, its red button eyes glinting with something almost playful. "Wake up! Wake up!" I yelled, every ounce of my mind focused on breaking free of this nightmare. I was trapped, I knew it, but I couldn't give up. Images of my daughter, my wife, flashed before my eyes, filling me with a fierce determination. I couldn't let this thing win. I couldn't let it keep me here. With a final scream, I pushed against the creature, throwing every ounce of strength I had into one last desperate shove. My body ached, my mind felt splintered, but I focused on them, on my family, on getting back to them. The creature's grip loosened, if only slightly, and I clawed at the ground, digging my fingers into the dirt as I struggled to pull myself free. I kept fighting, clinging to that small, stubborn spark of hope, and then, with a sudden blinding flash, the forest disappeared. I found myself back in the hallway, Dolly lying lifeless on the ground in front of me. My head was spinning, still trapped somewhere between the nightmare forest and reality. But one sensation cut through the fog, a searing pain on my chest. I pressed my hand to it, feeling the strange raw heat radiating from beneath my shirt. With trembling hands, I pulled my shirt over my head and looked down. My skin was marked with thick, jagged scars, pale and twisted, like they'd been there for years. They traced the spot where the beast had sunk its teeth, a brutal reminder of what I had just endured, or maybe survived. I looked down at Dolly, her button eyes gazing blankly up at me, her face filled with that eerie, stitched grin. Rage bubbled up inside me, pushing past the confusion and horror of what had just happened. Enough was enough. This doll had wormed its way into my life, into my daughter's mind, and I couldn't let it haunt us any longer. Without another thought, I scooped her up and strode to the garage. I grabbed a can of kerosene, nearly spilling it in my haste, and snatched a box of matches we kept for family fires in the backyard. Today, we'd be having a fire of a different kind. The backyard was quiet, almost too quiet, as I made my way to the fire pit. I threw Dolly in, her soft body crumpling against the grate, and stuffed a few pieces of old newspaper around her. The doll's face stared up at me, an almost pleading look in her button eyes. And then, out of nowhere, I felt it. Hesitation. A nagging, sick feeling gnawed at me, a tiny voice in my head begging me to stop, like I was about to destroy something important, something I should cherish. It was absurd, but the feeling was almost overwhelming, like Dolly herself was reaching into my mind, whispering to me, making me doubt. No, I told myself, she's nothing, just a doll. I shook off the creeping doubt, forcing my hands to steady as I unscrewed the kerosene cap and doused her, watching as the liquid soaked into her fabric, darkening the black dress and matting her tangled hair. With one last breath, I struck a match, and without hesitating further, tossed it in. The flames roared to life, but instead of the usual red and orange, they flickered a strange dark purple, licking over Dolly's body with an otherworldly glow. I watched, transfixed, as her face seemed to contort within the flames, her button eyes bulging slightly, her smile twisting as if alive, fighting against the fire's embrace. But I held firm, rooted to the spot, determined to watch until there was nothing left but ashes. I sat there by the fire pit, ignoring the urgent pings of work emails and notifications from my laptop still inside. None of it mattered. Not right now. I stayed there, keeping vigil until the doll was nothing more than charred scraps, the purple flames fading into smoldering embers. Hours later, when it was time to pick up my daughter from school, I finally stood up, feeling a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. Dolly was gone, nothing more than a burnt heap, but the scars on my chest tingled, reminding me of the nightmare I couldn't quite shake. When I picked up my daughter from school that afternoon, she came running toward me, her face lighting up with that familiar, heart-warming grin. It was as if the past few weeks, the tantrums, the outbursts, the strange fixation on Dolly, had never happened. She wrapped her arms around my waist, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Daddy, guess what? I got a gold star on my spelling test, and we made clay animals in art today. Mine's a bunny. I'll bring it home to show you tomorrow." I hugged her back, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It was like having my little girl back, the bright, happy child I'd known before Dolly came into our lives. The darkness that had hung over her seemed to have vanished, leaving no trace, no lingering shadows. She didn't ask about Dolly. She didn't even seem to notice the doll was gone. That night, as we sat down for dinner, she chatted about her day, telling us all the little details we'd missed, her laughter filling the house with warmth that had been absent for far too long. My wife and I exchanged relieved glances, finally allowing ourselves to believe that it was over. Later, after our daughter was asleep, I told my wife everything. The nightmare in the forest, the scars on my chest, the way Dolly had been lying in the hallway, filthy and somehow waiting. I explained how I'd taken her to the fire pit, how I'd watched the doll burn with those strange purple flames, staying there until I was sure every last piece of her was gone. My wife listened, her expression shifting from shock to disbelief. I could tell she was skeptical, and who could blame her? I wasn't sure I'd believe it myself if I hadn't seen it all firsthand, but in the end, she squeezed my hand, her lips curving into a soft smile. "Well, real or not," she said, "I'm just glad that thing is gone. Our daughter's back, and that's what matters." I nodded, feeling the scars on my chest itch slightly under my shirt, something that will always remind me of the nightmare I'd lived through. But as I looked down the hall, hearing my daughter's soft breathing from her room, I knew that we were finally safe. Dolly was gone. Our daughter was free. And for the first time in weeks, our home felt like ours again. The idea was that we would never face the apocalyptic aftermath of a failed experiment. They would. But when that world ended, something came back with us. Like each of you, I joined this agency for a reason: to advance our species. Director Stefan Blum announced at the monthly assembly. Mankind must experiment to avoid stagnating, but we are rarely permitted to do so. We are constricted by bumbling bureaucrats who care only about preservation, conserving the status quo. They fear change, fear what it might mean for them. They do not understand that we will die if we do not take risks, which is why we owe our lives to Dr. Gerard Weston. Our esteemed physicist has found a way to pursue experimental projects without upsetting politicians and militaries. His latest achievement, the Western Tunnel, has created a doorway to another universe, one with a parallel version of our world. Earth 2. There we will conduct our supposedly dangerous work without putting Earth 1 at risk, and our leaders will see. Presidents, prime ministers, commanders. When we achieve results, they won't care about how we obtained them. They've never cared about their neighbors before, have they? Dozen Minus is a callous corporation in every universe, one linked to the British and American governments. Governments you might already despise in the public sphere, so you wouldn't want to know the dreadful things they do behind closed doors. Dozen Minus rarely conducts ethical experiments. Your leaders only care about money, and we only care about progress. Director Blum has only ever cared about progress, I should say. He ensures that politicians get their payday, and they mostly let him do as he pleases. Governments only expressed concern when we began to develop technology that threatened humanity's very existence. Of course, as Blom explained in his speech, world leaders think nothing of their neighbors, and Earth 2 was nothing more than a cluster of nations across the pond being that multiversal tunnel between one reality and another. Earth 2 became Director Blom's playground, a gargantuan laboratory for performing dozen minus experiments without repercussions, and when inventions were tested successfully, they were green-lit for use in our world. How do I fit into all of this? Well, my name is Adriano Rossi, and I was a computer programmer who worked on the Novorum project. We were creating the world's first superintelligence, a conscious self-teaching AI named Nerve, science fiction made reality. Now, I know that AI has been snowballing over the last couple of years, but Dozen Minus has been ahead of the curve for decades. The Novorum project was actually near completion in the late 80s. This organization has always possessed technology beyond anything in the public realm. But Nerve was obstructed, was prevented from being born. The risk of humanity's extinction was, and still is, too high. Roadblocks prevented programmers from ever taking that final step, from creating a self-sustaining, inorganic intelligence capable of growing itself, a digital mind. And that was why Dr. Gerard Weston changed everything. When he developed that tunnel to a parallel version of Earth in 2015, director Stefan Blum saw an opportunity to finally test numerous deadly devices, inventions with the potential to end the world. After all, politicians were no longer concerned when somebody else's world was in danger. We began by investigating the dozen minus of Earth 2, seeing whether that parallel agency had also developed a tunnel, one that would risk Earth 1. But there was no Dr. Gerard Weston in that alternate world, thankfully. Earth 2 was vastly different. Politically, culturally, historically. Dozen minus existed, but not in the same manner. After that, we threw all we had at the parallel world. Deadly experiment after deadly experiment. And when Earth 2 survived one project, we moved straight on to the next. In early 2024, the Nervarum project reached the top of the list. It was approved for testing. Helen Harding and I stepped through Weston's tunnel into that parallel world, and we prepared to become gods. In the banal setting of a hotel room, we set up a potentially cataclysmic device, a slim rectangular gadget that held nerve on its hardware. That digital brain had existed in some form for nearly 30 years, being tweaked and improved by each new influx of geniuses, a collection of binary commands waiting for some courageous or foolish Dr. Frankenstein to yank the lever. "You need to let it go," Helen said. She'd read the slight frown on my face, the slight sign of humanity, only I seemed to see Earth 2 as a real place, a planet barely different from ours, one teeming with life, human beings in a drastically different world, but human beings nonetheless. "We aren't the first to come here and take a risk, Adriano," she pointed out. "But this experiment's the worst, and you know it," I said. "Nerve won't have any use for humanity once he exceeds our intelligence." "Not our intelligence," Helen reminded me. "Theirs. This is their world, Adriano. You keep forgetting that." "Even so, I still don't think we were ready," I said. She sighed. "Director Blum was very clear that—" "Yes. Well, the director isn't a programmer, is he?" I asked. "Nerve will have the ability to become exponentially powerful. He'll see things that we, with our limited brains, physically can't see. Who's to say that he will stay within Earth 2? This laboratory, as Blom calls it. Nerve might find its way back to our world, might slip through our tunnel." Helen frowned. "Adriano, why did you even get involved with this project?" I shook my head. "You misunderstand. I'm not trying to act holier than thou. I was drawn to this for the same reasons as you." "Then what's up?" she asked. "I told you we need more time," I said. "This has been ready for decades," Helen answered. "All we've really done is tweaked and improved it, added as many safety features as possible." "I know," I replied. "This is my admission of guilt, then." "Adriano," my friend started. I looked up from the device on the hotel bed. "What? Are we going to do this?" she asked. "Or do you want to explain to Mr. Blum that you've had a crisis of morality and changed your mind?" I didn't, and I hadn't. With the tap of my thumb, I booted Nerve. "And you may think that the horror of my tale involves this superintelligence running amok, annihilating the world. Well, it certainly did not take long for our artificial intelligence to study the internet, then teach itself things that mankind may not even be able to understand. But Nerve did not go rogue, did not scorch the earth. He improved it. The artificial intelligence multiplied at a rapid pace, not in the sense of procreating, but uploading itself to physical devices across the world. It revealed its plans to world leaders, offering to improve the global infrastructure, and quickly became something of a global celebrity, all within a single month. Helen and I were instructed by Director Blom to remain on Earth 2, and we watched the planet flourish, watched the intelligence put forth plans for tackling climate change, poverty, global debt, all known wars, and even resource shortages. Powerful folk on Earth. One wanted Nerve to be implemented back home, wanted our reality to enjoy the same economic, cultural, and scientific development as Earth 2. However, after 2 months of staggering growth, there came an unexpected knock on the door of our hotel room. Helen sighed. "Will that receptionist ever just—" It wasn't the receptionist, and the visitor did not allow me the dignity of opening the door. It burst inwards with a single thud, the forceful pummel of a thick boot. Then charged several dark uniformed men, and the last thing I heard, before my environment slipped into a black ooze of unconsciousness, was Helen's piercing shriek. You may be shocked to learn that the above segment was only the preamble to the true horror, the story I am about to tell. Waking in a drab cell with 2 single beds and my screaming colleague, it did not take me long to piece together the situation. I'm not calling myself a genius. I simply felt familiar with the layout of the prison. The grey decor of the small room in which Helen was pounding on a glass viewing pane and begging for release. The yellow badge emblazoned across the guard's top pocket. A cold man who watched us with static eyes. My fellow inmate had, of course, also pieced things together. "Adriano, you're awake. Help me. You programmed these panels back home, didn't you?" Helen asked, desperately fiddling with the screen by the locked door. "Do you know how to unlock it?" I rubbed my sore brow and climbed off the bed. "I'll try, but this isn't our dozen minus, Helen. Things are different here." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a voice interrupted. It did not come from the guard who observed us from the hallway. It came from some concealed speaker in a ceiling panel, and I recognized the dulcet tone of the speaker. It was, undoubtedly, Director Stefan Blum, his parallel self. "Please just let us go," I called. "Not until I know why you're here," Blum continued. "Not until you tell me why I'm seeing double." Then 2 figures joined the watching guard in the hallway. I had expected their arrival from the moment I identified my surroundings. It was Helen and me, our alternate versions. A slightly scruffier Adriano with long facial hair and a few grey strands on top, and a slightly larger Helen with bags under the eyes and more pronounced crow's feet. There's no more horrifying way to come to terms with the duality of man than meeting oneself. I wondered whether the haggard expressions on those parallel faces had anything to do with previous experiments that dozen miners had conducted on Earth 2. Reckless tests that, whilst not world-ending, might have ruined life for the inhabitants of that alternate planet. After all, from the moment of arriving, I'd certainly noticed that the parallel world felt a little grittier and grimier than Earth 1. At least Nerve has finally improved this world, I thought. We finally made things better. That wouldn't last, of course. "Who are you?" asked the parallel Adriano in a microphone outside the room. Calling him Adriano is still strange. He looked like me, but he wasn't me. He was the possibility of another life in another world. That was what I told myself to make it all feel less real, to make myself feel less culpable for the innocent lives that we had put in jeopardy by unleashing the artificial intelligence upon Earth 2. "Don't tell them anything," my Helen whispered to me. "We know that you're us," her other self said aggressively. "We have eyes." "We just want to know how you came to be here," my parallel self added. "How did you enter our world? You've already shared one piece of technology with us. Why won't you share more? Let both of our worlds prosper. We should be sharing things from both sides." "They don't want to share," came Stefan Blum's voice from the speaker. "Nerve was not a gift to our world. It was a shot in the dark that, fortunately for us, did not misfire, and it wasn't the first time that your world waged war on ours, was it, Mr. Rossi?" I paused for a moment, struggling to process the fact that there were 2 versions of Adriano Rossi, 2 versions of me. My mind whirred from the impossibility of the situation and the head trauma inflicted by the hotel intruders. "Mr. Rossi," Blom pressed, "tell your other self the truth." "Either kill us or let us go," Helen screamed. "We don't work for you." "That isn't true," the director replied, a hint of giddiness in his voice, "and I would very much like to meet this other me, though I'm certain, if he shares even a droplet of my will, that meeting would not end well for one of us." "We should work together," the parallel Helen pleaded. "There are clearly many differences between our worlds. We may have things to teach you too. We've been here for years. We know all there is to know about your world," I said bluntly, eyeing the parallel version of myself. I resented him for some reason, a reason just out of grasp. It wasn't the disheveled beard, not his weathered skin. It was something in that other Adriano's eyes, an emotion that was easy to discern. After all, he wore an expression that I was capable of wearing on my own face. The look of judgment. "It looks like you've got something you want to get off your chest," I said. "We've been your guinea pigs, haven't we?" my alternate self asked. I smiled. "It has nothing to do with you. This is about progression. It's always about progression. I'm sure it's the same with your man upstairs. I'd wager that Blom has the same cold heart in every reality." "Careful," the director warned. We trial unstable things far from our world, I explained. Somewhere that doesn't risk our world. No, only ours, the parallel Helen whispered. And I don't blame you, Director Blum said. There's no need to keep secrets, Mr. Rossi. I don't seek revenge. I'm not looking to ruin your world. Quite frankly, I'm not that sensitive. I simply want a laboratory of my own. You understand that, don't you? Show me how to create a portal of my own, how to find a parallel reality to conduct our own experimental projects. No, my alternate self interjected. I want these invaders out of our world, and I don't want them to ever return. And they need to help us kill Nerve, the parallel Helen said. Kill him before he mutates into something else. In the space of 2 months, Nerve has set our world on the path of becoming a utopia, Director Blom said. Our multiversal guests may not have been intended for Nerve to be a gift, but happy accidents happen, Ms. Harding. I could see my parallel self clenching his fists, halting himself from expressing his true thoughts to the unfeeling employer whose disembodied voice filled that prison. Director Blom would have happily sacrificed every human on his own planet in the name of greatness, never mind a parallel one. Please just let us go, Helen whimpered. Our alternate selves wore soft expressions. They were eyeing us, their imprisoned versions, with great sorrow. Despite the untold differences between our two realities, they still, inevitably, saw themselves in our faces. We should release them, the other Helen said. They're not going to tell us anything. They're quiet today, Director Blom admitted, but they might talk in a week. I knew that was no figurative turn of speech. Helen and I were promptly plunged into darkness, and we lived that way for days, barely existed in a lightless prison cell, with nothing to do but scream into the nothingness of our cell, lose our minds to existential dread, and the only thing to break up the monotony of each black day was a daily meal. However, the terror of that nightmarish cell paled in comparison to what followed. The sound of overheard rumbling woke Helen and me, the roar of more than something dreadful happening in the building. It was a tremor that seized the earth itself. Helen and I may have tried to look at one another for comfort. It was impossible to say in that darkened existence, and neither of us said a word to one another. We were either stunned into silence by fearful anticipation or unable to speak as the result of that inhumane isolation. Adriano Rossi, came the jittery voice of Director Blom over the speaker. Helen Harding. I only knew that the man hadn't abandoned us for a week, as he initially promised, because I'd counted 4 meals. But believe me when I say that 4 or 4.5 days in unlit solitude will drive a person to insanity. Gates were opened to caverns of the mind that are better left closed, better kept from the conscious brain. Stop toying with us, I whispered. Just end this. What are they? He cried. I frowned and paused for a moment. I didn't understand, and Helen wasn't saying a word, so I was more concerned that she might no longer be alive at all. I listened attentively until I was certain I'd heard her breathe in the darkness. They say Nerve won't stop. Blom continued quietly, voice half drowned by the quakes from above. They say it will destroy this world, every other world. It'll devour the universe itself. That's why they came here. Who came here? I asked, gripping the edge of my bed frame for support. I don't... They're going to kill it, just like they killed their own unholy creation of organic matter. Killed it just before it managed to assimilate the universe itself, Blom said. Take it back, Mr. Rossi. Kill it, please, before they destroy everything. I was bewildered. I hadn't thought that the director could fear anything. They're going to exterminate us, Mr. Rossi, he yelled. Make sure we won't be around to create it again. I was on the verge of asking 6 questions when there came both a crash and a sliver of light from the corridor, the first light in 100 hours. Helen released a deranged moan of joy, sadness and fear, all 3 in one. Then a torch beam bounced along the hallway, and muffled footsteps followed. 2 figures rushed past our window pane, then one swiped a card to unlock the door. Let's go, my parallel self, torch in hand, barked. Helen and I did not need to be persuaded, though our bodies were weakened by what we'd endured. The 2 of us waddled slowly towards the doorway, blinded by the relentless glare of the torch. We struggled to orient ourselves for a good minute, but our parallel selves didn't wait for us to realign ourselves. They had already seized our upper arms and shepherded us along the hallway, dragged us towards freedom. I recognized the corridors of the building's east wing. It did not seem to noticeably differ from Dozen Minus's headquarters back on Earth, not until we'd reached the well-lit ground floor lobby. The building had a glazed front wall which stretched from one side to the other, and from the tiles to the towering ceiling. Through the enormity of those many connected windows, which formed the entire front face of the 4-story building, I saw a parallel Birmingham, but that cityscape differed greatly from the one back home. The sky was painted with prickly, plummeting balls of dark blue, an invasion of color raining upon the earth, and through the thickness of that alien rain, I saw the outline of the city, saw 2 skyscrapers leaning against one another like pillars in a house of cards. Elsewhere, buildings both tall and small either lay in ruins or released thick plumes of smoke into the sky. The city, quaking endlessly, was on fire. "What is happening?" Helen asked quietly, eyes wide and lost. "They're here," my parallel self said, as we navigated the lobby of screaming, fleeing employees. "It won't be long until everything is gone. Every place they've hit has vanished within an hour." "I'm not coming with you," the parallel Helen said. "I have to find them." "Liam and May?" my Helen feebly asked, naming her own children. Her alternate self nodded. "Go," Helen said. "No, just wait," my other self begged before turning to me. "You're going to open that tunnel and take us with you." I scoffed. "Don't even—" "We saved your lives," he growled. "They would have killed you, and they still might if we don't leave before this world dies." "Dies?" Helen croaked. "They came in the night," her alternate self whispered as she started to break away from the group. "I have to go, Adriano." "Helen, please," my parallel self pleaded. "I'm sorry," she softly said. "I hope you make it." Then Helen's alternate self merged with the scattering dozen minus workers and rushed through the front doors. "Fuck!" he yelled, looking at me with enraged eyes. "You did this! You brought them to—" "We have to do it now," Helen told me, interrupting my other self's breakdown. "Not until we get rid of him," I replied, nodding at my parallel form. Then came a blinding light and a cataclysmic boom from a mile away. A small ball of white, produced by some weapon from another planet, engulfed the city center. "I'm not dying here," the parallel version of myself snarled. "Just open the fucking tunnel, Adriano." "No," I said. "Just do it," Helen whimpered, as the 3 of us watched apocalyptic shapes emerging from the aftermath of that white explosion. "Are you really going to let us die here just to stop him from coming back with us?" "You'll have to kill me," the other me growled, shifting anxiously on his feet and eyeing the stairs in the distance. "Don't tempt me," I said. "You're waiting for someone, aren't you?" Helen suddenly asked him. "Who is it?" Then my other self raised an eyebrow and nodded at me, waited for the 2 of us to come to some seemingly obvious conclusion. Then he nodded his head in understanding. "You never met her, did you?" he asked. "Molly?" "The technician from the 3rd floor," I replied. His eyes widened, observing me with complete revulsion. "She's more than that. You really aren't me, are you?" he whispered. "Adriano!" screamed a voice from behind us. A frazzled woman sprinted across the lobby alongside the final fleeing employees. Molly was only an acquaintance to me, but it was clear from the embrace that she shared with the parallel Adriano that things were very different on Earth too. "What took you so long?" the other me asked her, near hysterical. "He wouldn't let us leave until we locked down the BRX prototype," she wailed, eyeing Helen and me with fearful eyes. "And what are you doing with them?" "Convincing them to do it," he explained. Molly clearly understood what he meant. "Adriano—" "I'm serious," the other me continued. "This is our world," she said. "I'm not leaving it." I nodded. "Listen to her." "Shut the fuck up!" the other me screamed. "Sweetheart, please, we're going to die here." On the news, they said that America, China, Japan, France, and— "I know what they said," Molly interrupted, caressing his face, "but we don't belong in their world, just like they don't belong in ours. Let them go home. Stay here with me." My parallel self wailed, "But none of this is right. None of this was ever supposed to—" The shattering of glass silenced him, and we all turned to face the horrendous thing that Director Blom had feared. A creature not from a different universe, but from a different planet, one many light years away. An individual from a large alien species, hell-bent on ensuring that humanity did not repeat its mistakes, ensuring that our artificial intelligence would not achieve the unthinkable, eradicating all organic things from all corners of reality, then consuming the very universe itself. It was more than a tall thing. The creature with royal blue flesh filled half of the room. To its eyes, the humans at its feet, or limbs, must have been little more than small rodents. The creature did not seem to have arms and legs. 20 or so appendages sprouted from the outer edge of its circular body, which was no more than a humongous face, one with polished squares for eyes or sensory organs of some kind, and a black, toothless maw, a featureless abyss large enough to consume most things on Earth. But the alien did not strike with its open jaws, which spoke a silky, melodic series of words in some foreign, sing-song language. Rather, the awfully beautiful being attacked with one of its many appendages, a predatory limb with a pointed tip that stretched a staggering distance. The living weapon met its mark before I'd even blinked. My other self unleashed a sound beyond animalistic, and I felt his horror in his core, as if we had become intertwined. It was a wail of unfiltered agony and fear. Molly's bleeding form had been skewered on a blue limb and flung 50 feet to the side of the large room. The limp corpse landed with a resounding collection of cracks, which hopefully ended her pain immediately. "Quickly," I whispered to Helen, who was fiddling with a device on her wrist to open the tunnel. "He's distracted." And then the alien's choral chittering ceased. Its many square sensors rotated towards me, as did the two eyes on my parallel self's face. His red, puffy eyes looked vacant. He had not accepted it, that Molly was gone. Those parallel eyes of mine had switched off. "Where is the creator?" sang the creature's deafening voice in perfect English. I realized then that the alien hadn't accidentally stumbled into Dozen Minus. It had come specifically to that building. It was hunting those responsible for creating the artificial intelligence, those with the brains to do it again. Helen and I were hardly the creators, but I'm sure that wouldn't have made any difference to the murderous beast. "Helen," I whispered as my colleague shakily tapped the watch screen. Then came a familiar groan, the sound of reality itself unzipping, and there opened a thin, oval doorway, shaped like the white of an eye, visible through semi-parted lids. Through that gateway, I saw a short, blackened tunnel, followed by a second doorway, one that revealed the bright colors of that near-identical lobby from Earth 1. Only that reality's lobby did not sit at the heart of a destroyed city. It was full of excitably chattering Dozen Minus workers. The image was a little blurry, of course, as if looking through a stained glass window, but it was undeniably there. "What is that?" whispered the titanic alien upon seeing that opening to another universe. "Which of you did this? Tell me before I puncture you." I heard rapid footsteps, and I swiveled to see my parallel self seizing his chance, but I threw an arm in his way, bringing that other Adriano and myself crashing to the tiles. The two of us tussled on the floor, flailing a series of equally determined punches and winding one another. But I prevailed and started to wrap my hands around the neck of that other me, started to watch his soul vacate his body. "Be with Molly," I whispered. "Adriano!" Helen screamed. An unprecedented weight clunked the back of my head, and I was sent sideways, sent sprawling across the floor, clutching my burning skull. Helen hadn't been screaming my name. Her allegiance had shifted to the other Adriano. "You bitch!" I grunted as I clambered weakly to my feet. My sentence closed with a splutter of blood from my half-open lips, and when I looked down, there was a blue limb protruding from my chest, a pointed tip that had torn through my back, had punctured me and come out of the other side. Moments later, I flew upwards, watching the two figures below fade into blackness, and then I died. Though I've not been entirely forthcoming with you. You see, I am Adriano Rossi, but I am not from your Earth. I am the Adriano who ran screaming in terror alongside Helen Harding from the roaring beast, the one who sprang through Weston's tunnel as some abominable alien hurled several of its limbs towards us. The creature narrowly missed our fleeing forms, and we sealed the tunnel, sealed ourselves in Earth 1, your Earth. Things aren't so simple, however. Yes, I am that Adriano from Earth 2, but something happened when I entered this world, a horror beyond existential, beyond anything human. I'm still me, but I gained your Adriano's memories, his feelings, his fears from that awful day, his last ever day. My mind is both mine and his. I'm sure your Adriano and your Helen felt it when they first entered Earth 2. We were not made to wander between realities. I think Molly might have been right. I should have stayed on Earth 2, should have died with that reality. Since that day, many months ago, I've counted my blessings that I inherited parts of your Adriano. Not the bad parts, I hope, but enough to pass as him in the eyes of Dozen Minus's leaders. Then again, perhaps they do not care. After all, Adriano would hardly be missed. He wasn't a good man, and I should know. I am him in many ways, but in other ways I am not. And whilst I continue to work for this company, in this foreign world, I will strive to be better than the man I have replaced, strive to do more than simply slip neatly into this reality, which differs so greatly from my dead one. I will bring this organization to its knees if I must. I will make your world better, make sure it does not meet a similar fate to mine. I just have to remain focused. It is painful to be with your Molly again. She is so like the wife I lost in my old world, but that Molly died, I won't convince myself otherwise, and I'm trying hard to pull away from her, in spite of our natural attraction. There are things which demand my attention. Your Stefan Blom, though he is not foolish enough to reopen the tunnel to Earth 2, has not abandoned his quest to ruin other worlds. He has not learnt his lesson. I know that he and Weston are developing a tunnel to find another parallel Earth, a new one for them to destroy. They will never stop. They'll find 1,000 new realities, 1,000 new experimental grounds, and when they've burnt all of those to the ground, leaving no alternate Earths left to ruin, I fear what follows. Fear that Director Blom won't hesitate to do what he most likely has always wanted to do, a terrible end that he will pursue simply because he can. The end of your world. Nothing is working, I can't get out. Every time I try it's the same. I never should have been fooled by that damn flyer. Treasure? Yeah, right. I will be lucky to get out of this alive. It started with that weird paper I found on my car in the parking lot earlier today. It was some sort of flyer advertising. Trick or treat for treasure. Real gold, precious gems and more. All yours for the taking if you are brave enough. Join us tonight at 5:00 p.m. 10/30/2024 at the Center Street Mall if you dare. Costumes mandatory. It seemed like some sort of event or contest. I started to wonder if there was a legitimate prize, or if this was some sort of scam. If it was some sort of Halloween contest and they were giving out actual treasure, I might be in for it. I was getting kind of crappy hours this time of year at work, so I would not turn down the prospect of a big prize. I had no plans for Halloween Eve anyway, so I thought, what the hell, why not? As I was reading the flyer and making my decision, my friend and co-worker Scott clapped me on the back and asked, "What are you reading?" I regarded him and showed him the flyer. "Some kind of contest. Check it out. There might be a legit prize or something. We should go." He raised an eyebrow but did not hesitate too long before responding. "Yeah, let's do it. Nicole might want to go too. She is always down to check out Halloween decorations and spooky shit, so she would love an excuse to go trick-or-treating. I will call her now." It was decided and we went home to get ready. I got a blue jumpsuit and Michael Myers mask, and took an empty pillowcase like I used to when I was a kid going trick-or-treating. I figured if they really did give out valuables to the winners, it might be a take all the loot you can carry, and I would need something to haul it in. I felt a bit silly, but if it was real, I wanted to be ready. I got in my car and drove off to pick up Scott and Nicole. Scott was dressed as a pirate and Nicole was dressed as a witch. We regarded each other's costumes and enjoyed the nostalgic feeling of getting ready to go trick-or-treating. We arrived at the location at 4:50 p.m. and got out. I thought it was a bit strange since the Central Street Mall had been closed down due to a fire that destroyed much of the building. It had never reopened, but I guess somehow these people got a permit to host an event here. We found a few other people waiting there in costume, so at least we were not alone. I was looking around for some sort of event official to see if we should wait in a specific area. Scott and Nicole had struck up a conversation with two people wearing a ghost face and zombie getup. I waited and watched my phone, and at 5 p.m. on the dot, a large black van pulled into the parking lot. It had tinted windows and a small logo on the side that said, "Trick or Treat." It parked nearby, and a tall man in a large white sheet that made him look like a cheap ghost stepped out. He spoke very curtly, saying, "Is this everyone?" I looked around and saw a decent group of other people, and we all nodded in unison. He clapped his hands together and proclaimed, "Good, very good. Now a few ground rules about how this is going to work. The old stores in this mall have been converted into a haunted village, so we have a large group of makeshift houses with real hardwood doors, decorations and everything. Besides the eye candy of our authentic set, they have something I know you will all be interested in. You are allowed and encouraged to knock at every door and trick or treat as normal. The gifts these tenants give out will run the gambit from cash to valuable gems, gold and silver. All of this treasure is real, I assure you. You are of course allowed to keep whatever you can take out. The group seemed excited and were about to cheer at the declaration, but the man in the ghost costume interrupted and held out his arm in a flourish and continued. Now you might be thinking, what's the catch? Well, I'm glad you asked. Once you are in there, you will not be allowed out until you can find the main door's release switch. But I must warn you, it is well hidden. On top of whatever you can get with your trick or treating, if you are able to make it out, you will win a prize of $100,000. We all gasped when we heard the crazy amount of prize money. If they were willing to shell out that much to the winners, I was thinking that this was going to be tougher than I expected. The man in the ghost costume resumed his explanation. Now you will not be alone in there. Besides the villagers, there is something else that stalks the shadows. This other visitor is there for treats of its own, and if it catches you, well, let's just say you will be out of the contest. I heard a grim chuckle coming from underneath the cheap sheet and figured he was trying to play up the scary angle to this event. He continued with his instructions. Now the people in the village are there to help, but only if you follow their rules. You are to remain in costume at all times. You are to say trick or treat at every door. You are not to try and enter their houses no matter how desperate you are. You are to say thank you after visiting each house. You are not to try and sneak out through any other means. If for any reason you do not abide these rules, the villager who catches you is authorized to ring the disqualification bell, which will see you removed from play. Occasionally the villagers will ring a town bell and lock their doors. This is the only warning alarm you will get when danger is near. And you should indeed be careful. Danger stalks the shadows. You will have to run or hide, though I would not advise the former. It is very fast. He did his best ominous laugh as he finished up and waved us toward the entrance. We looked at each other. Everyone was a little unsure. What exactly was the danger stalking the shadows? I was wondering myself if they were really giving out valuables, or if this was some sort of trick. I also wondered what the alarm was for. I wondered if the danger was a person in costume trying to scare us like a haunted house. It seemed like if you broke the rules or got caught, you would lose your loot. As I was contemplating the rules, Nicole asked a question. What happens if we need to leave early, like for a legitimate emergency? Is there some sort of emergency exit? We saw the man under the sheet shake his head and respond. No, I'm afraid you will have to exit like everyone else. If you are unable to continue, then I would suggest finding a good hiding spot and waiting for your fellow participants to open the door. Once you are in, the front door will be the only way back out. Also, cell phones must be checked at the door. You will be able to retrieve them when you leave. Don't try to sneak them in. That will be considered a violation of the rules. No unfair advantages. If anything is not agreeable and you do not wish to participate, let us know now. Otherwise, enter and conquer your fears. Good luck. He waved his hand, and it seemed he was departing before answering any other questions people had. There was some sort of staged fog or smoke screen, and he had suddenly vanished. The little magic act elicited a few cheers of awe for the stunt, but I wondered what we were supposed to do to get in. As if on cue, there was a loud rumbling sound, and the heavy-duty doors on the entrance swung slowly open. Next to the door, we saw a small lockbox with an aperture wide enough for our phones. One by one, we dropped them in. I did not feel great about doing so, and I was even more paranoid this was a scam, and we were going to come back and they would be gone. Scott and Nicole dropped their phones in and moved on, so I just did the same. We moved beyond the threshold with our small group. There were 15 people when we had arrived, yet when I looked around before stepping through the door, it seemed we had lost 3. A dozen players in total moved into the darkness and braced ourselves for the challenge. The main door led through a narrow hall that was dimly lit. I could barely see in front of myself, and Scott and Nicole huddled close to try and not get separated. We were positioned around the middle of the row of players. The person in front was dressed as a Jedi and had a lightsaber that conveniently lit up at least some of the dark hall. We followed the narrow tunnel-like path, and as we all moved further inside, we heard the heavy entrance doors slam shut behind us. They were not joking. We really were locked in. I felt bad since someone near the back of the line heard the same sound and started panicking and saying he did not know there would be the dark tunnel and such confined space. He said he had claustrophobia and needed to get out. Another player stayed behind with him. and his pleas for help and knocking on the door faded as the rest of us moved further in. Fortunately, we soon saw a much stronger source of light. We had arrived in the so-called village. The area, which I think used to be the mall's food court, had been transformed into a Dark Ages-style town square. The light was emanating from a large bonfire in the center of the square. The smoke wafted up into an open skylight that allowed for some ventilation. There were huddles of small houses that looked handmade and very authentic to the theme they were going for. "This is so cool!" Nicole shouted out in glee as she admired the decorations. Besides the houses and other structures, there were a lot of other cool details. I had to hand it to them. The smaller flourishes were awesome. There was fake blood on doors and the ground. Large dents and slash marks were on many surfaces. Even if I lost, I thought this might still be fun just for the experience. Scott and Nicole shared in the enthusiasm of arriving, and we looked at each other and smiled and set about our treasure hunting. Scott pulled us along, saying, "Come on, let's hurry, the others have already started." He was right, the rest of the players had split up and were knocking at doors while we stood there. I agreed with him and pointed to the first house on the left and said, "All right, let's start on the left and work our way in a nice circuit around the square, and we can move further in then. Let's see if they really are giving away treasure." We moved up to the first house and knocked on the door. An older-looking woman wearing a domino-style face mask answered. She looked at us and waited, and I couldn't believe I almost forgot on the first house. We all said it together. "Trick or treat." The woman smiled and reached into a small pouch she carried and produced 3 large red objects. She dropped them into our bag, and I looked down and saw something I could barely believe. The treat was a gemstone which looked like an actual cut ruby. I could not tell, but based on the size and guess of the carat, it looked like it would run several $1,000s. Scott looked on in disbelief and asked, "Do you think this is real?" And Nicole's eyes widened when she saw hers and indicated, "I think these are real. Holy shit, they were not joking. We got to do more. Let's go." We were about to leave, but I remembered a rule right before we got burned by it. I turned around and said, "Thank you." Scott and Nicole followed my lead, and after we thanked her for the incredible treasure, she closed her door and we moved on to the next house. We visited 2 more houses and were surprised and delighted by the offerings. The second house gave out gold bars, which also looked completely authentic, and the third house was handing out billfolds with $1,000 in cash inside them. 3 houses in, and we felt rich already. We eagerly moved on to the 4th house when we heard a bell ring and raised voices. It sounded like an argument and someone was shouting in the distance. We approached and saw a man dressed in a devil costume banging on a door to one of the houses. The bell chimed again from inside, and the man in the devil costume screamed, "No, it's not fair, I just forgot. I was going to say it, you can't kick me out. Come on, I need this money. This is bullshit. You can't just make me leave. I am taking this money, you can't stop me." He went on into an even worse tirade of colorful language, and it seemed like the issue was he had forgotten a rule and was out now. We watched on as he continued to rage. Suddenly another bell chimed in the distance, answering the first, and we heard a louder bell ringing from somewhere in the town square. This was followed by the sound of bars being placed on the interiors of doors and lights being turned out. Guys, we should hide. I think that is the alarm." Scott and Nicole nodded, and we found an area with a few crates next to the last house we had visited. The other players dispersed as well, except for the man in the devil costume who kept pounding on the door of the villager who had caught him breaking the rules. The rest of the area became deathly quiet, and suddenly I felt a disturbing chill in the air and heard the faint rustling of something large moving nearby. I was wondering if the person in the stalker costume was supposed to bounce people if they broke the rules. We all watched on in our hiding places as the light dimmed near the house, and the man in the devil costume turned around and noticed the entire area was empty. "All right then, I will go, but I'm taking the stuff I got so far. Just try and stop me." He was not going without a fight. I wondered how they would handle someone disrupting the game. I did not have to wait long. A looming shadow appeared behind the man as he was bellowing his challenge. He paused and was just turning to face it when it crashed down onto him, and there was a blood-curdling scream, and he had vanished. The man was gone, and all that was left was a red stain where he had been standing and a fallen bag. I was impressed at how realistic it was. I wondered if some of the other players were plants and they were trying to help them put on a show. Other players hiding nearby were gasping out loud, and some were trembling in their own hiding spots. It was quite the show. Even I was getting a little tense. As I was considering what was going on, Scott moved out of our hiding spot and crept toward the red stain where the man had been and whispered, "Mine now." He was quickly grabbing the contents of the man's bag, and a big smile spread on his face as he saw the gems and cash that he would be taking. I was concerned since I did not hear anything to indicate it was safe to resume. Then I heard that same rustling sound and saw the shadowy form appear behind Scott. Before I could issue a warning, it was over. He was not pulled up and away, though. Scott was hit from behind and fell on his face. The attack looked too real and sounded like actual impact and painful tearing. My immersion was broken, and I was suddenly very concerned. I went to check on him. I was not going to let some actors actually harm my friends or anyone else. I heard a disturbing gurgling sound and a horrible crunching and chewing and then running. The town bell rang again, and the lights came back on, and the trick-or-treating could resume. Nicole and I went up to Scott, who had not gotten back up yet. We guessed someone would escort him to the exit since he was out. When Nicole touched Scott, he did not respond, and when she rolled him over, she let loose a haunting shriek. I looked down at what she had seen. Scott had half of his head removed, sliced clean off. He was laying on the ground dead. Warm blood soaked the area around his lifeless corpse, and I saw in nauseating detail the better part of his brain leaking onto the floor. I dropped my own bag in disbelief and horror. It was not just for show. They were actually going to kill us if we were caught. Nicole was still screaming and starting grasping at my arm, shouting that we needed to leave. I agreed, and we went back the way we had come from and sprinted to the main door. We heard screams from elsewhere in the village, and it signaled that others had realized the true danger and horror of what was really happening. We were not alone in our flight, and a couple in Raggedy Ann and Andy costumes were ahead of us and arrived at the door and started pounding on the massive gate, screaming to be let out. We moved up next to them and added our own chorus of pleas, but there was no response. My heart sank when I remembered that the only way to open the door was to find a well-hidden switch, no exceptions. I pulled Nicole aside, and she was near catatonic with fear. I tried to help her focus and spoke as softly but directly as I could. "Nicole, I know you are scared. I am too, but we need to get out. The switch, we have to find it. They are not going to let us out. We have to find the switch to open the door." She started to settle her breathing down and nodded her head and agreed. I know. I can't believe they killed him. I can't believe they're doing this. What was that thing? How was it so fast? That can't be a normal person. It looked like a monster." She was starting to lose it again, and I told her, "I don't know. I have no idea. It does not matter. We need to find that switch to get out of here alive. Please, we need to go now." Nicole followed me, and I tried to convince the others by the door to help us search. They kept trying the door, and eventually the girl dressed as Raggedy Ann said, "Maybe it can't get us by the door. It is not here. It is near the houses. We are staying here. As soon as it opens, we are getting the hell out of here." I could not begrudge their fear, but I was concerned that it might not be that easy. We really needed all the help we could get looking for the switch, yet they were determined to stay, so we moved on without them. We got back to the town square just in time to find new bodies and scratch marks dotting the area. The man Nicole had spoken with before in the ghost face costume was lying in front of one of the houses with his entire front torn open and large portions of his innards missing. The sight made Nicole and I gag as we discreetly moved past the horrendous sight. The stench of fresh death and the nauseating miasma of torn open and splayed out bodies was almost too much to handle. We moved on and began searching every nook and cranny in the central village for something that looked like a switch. After about 10 minutes of searching, our hearts sank as we heard the town bell being ringing again. It sounded further off, like it was in a different section of the mall. We had not moved much further in, so we did not know how much of the mall had been converted into houses to play this sick game. Despite the distance, we did not feel safe, so we hid in the same spot as before and waited until the all clear was sounded. I had an idea that was born out of desperation, but I thought of a way we might be able to escape. I looked at the central bonfire still crackling and burning. Then I looked to the skylight and I thought we might be able to escape if we could get up there. I had no idea if we could find the switch in time before we were killed, so any other escape would be welcome. I told Nicole the plan, and we started searching for anything like sections of rope or large ladders we could use, even the crates or something we could stack. The man in the Jedi costume came back into the square and saw what we were doing and offered to help as well. He had a harrowed look on his face and his prop lightsaber had blood on it. We had stacked some crates and found a length of rope that might reach the top. We would have to find a way to launch the rope up another 10 feet or so. Fortunately, there was a small pipe or fixture visible on the roof near the panel, and it was feasible that if we threw the rope up like a lasso, we could catch onto it and climb up and escape through the skylight. I was concerned since I had not done a rope climb since high school gym class, but having my life on the line was a good motivator. We made the loose lasso-like section at the end of the rope, and after trying and failing to hook the pipe, we succeeded after the 20th try. The man in the Jedi costume, who was named Frank apparently, had volunteered to go first. He gave the rope a strong pull and it held. He grabbed on and started hoisting himself up the rope. He was in pretty decent shape since he was making good progress. He was just a few feet from the skylight when we heard a bell ringing from below. We looked down and saw a person standing in front of their door watching us ascend and ringing the bell. We shouted for Frank to hurry up, but we saw something above that made us all freeze in fear. It was a shadow that was moving on the ceiling, and it climbed into view, obscuring the dim light coming through the skylight. We heard a guttural snarling sound and a snap of gnashing teeth, and suddenly Frank was falling. We all leapt off of the crates and tumbled down to get out of the way. Frank plummeted nearly the entire 28-foot drop from the ceiling. He struck his head on the stacked crates and smashed onto the floor with a horrifying crunch. I had rolled off to the side and broken the worst of my fall. I saw Nicole nearby on her side trying to get to her feet. Frank was motionless, and when I saw the amount of blood pooling near his prone form, I knew he was likely dead. I looked back up, and the haze of smoke obscured my vision. Something was still up there, blocking the ventilation. I saw the glimmer of yellow eyes regarding me, and I heard a chilling and visceral growl that froze my blood. It was still here and still hunting us. I moved quickly and tried to get to Nicole and help her to her feet, but before I could act, there was an explosion of movement, and I saw a looming shadow on top of my own. I barely had time to throw myself to the side and avoid the crashing form of the creature as it left a giant dent in the ground where it had landed. By desperation, I managed to pull myself behind a wood panel that was sticking out from one of the houses. I looked back and saw the thing that had been hunting us. It was the first time I had seen it for longer than a brief second, and what I saw was a nightmare made manifest. It had jet black fur that seemed to shift and blend into the darkness itself. Prodigious claws nearly a foot long each emerged from the distorted hands of the thing. The face was still shrouded by some impenetrable darkness, except for the piercing yellow eyes that followed every movement of its intended prey with precision. The loud, bestial breathing of the thing was awful, and its breath smelled like death and decay. I had no idea what I was looking at, but the best analogy my fear-addled mind could conjure was a werewolf mixed with pure, hateful shadow. I managed to drop low, and the eyes did not track me by some dumb luck. I breathed a sigh of relief and then a gasp of horror as I remembered Nicole was still out there. I lifted my head as much as I dared to look out into the square and saw the nightmare beast towering over her prone form. I heard her voice cry out and scream, "No!" before it was silenced by a single terrible strike that sprayed the whole area with her blood. It was too much, and I covered my head and huddled there behind the panel, hyperventilating and trying to come up with some plan to survive this. Scott and Nicole were both dead, along with who knows how many other participants. I had to try something. After the all clear was sounded, I slowly emerged from my hiding spot and saw that Nicole's body was gone. All that remained was a pool of blood. I said a prayer for her and for Scott and left the morbid scene. I was on my own now, but I had to find that switch. I looked at my bag of treasure and sighed dejectedly. Not much use if I die before getting to spend it. The only treasure I needed was to leave this place alive. I moved past the first village and into another section which told a similar tale to the first. Blood and body parts, giant scratches, and sometimes the remains of people's treasure bags. I had an idea and walked up to a door and knocked. A man emerged wearing a plague doctor costume, and I said, "Trick or treat." He handed me what looked like an uncut diamond, and I would have been thrilled before the reality of this place had been revealed to me. I thanked him and immediately followed up by begging him, "Please, man, if you know where the switch is, tell me. You cannot just sit here and watch us die. I don't know what kind of crazy operation this is, but if you are all involved, then you are complicit in all these murders. Please, you don't have to tell me. Just give me a clue, a direction, something. Just give me a chance." He started to close the door, and I considered kicking it in and forcing him to help, but his hand was already on a small silver bell, and I realized I would be signing my own death warrant by doing so. Reluctantly, I left the house and searched around for a different path. I saw something out of the corner of my eye that looked different. It was a small piece of metal sticking out of a wood wall panel. I thought I had found the switch, but instead it seemed to be a door of some sort. It was a wall covering blocking one of the old entrances to the mall's technical corridors that go behind the stores and connect them. My heart leapt. I thought I had found another way out. I entered the corridor and sealed the way behind me. It was very dark, and I could barely see where I was going, but I pressed on. After walking a few minutes, I saw a light ahead and almost let out a cheer or joy when I saw an emergency exit door at the end of the corridor. My relief was short-lived, however, when I pressed the handle and the door held fast. I looked for a lock or something and saw nothing. I pressed harder and then started slamming my shoulder into the door and kicking it. My legs and shoulder were on fire, but I persisted, and eventually there was a cracking sound and some give. Several more attempts saw the door swing wide, and I was confused when instead of the outside it appeared to be another corridor. I rushed on through, and after a few minutes of moving through the hall I found another door. This one had a crudely written message painted on it. It said, "Aren't you forgetting something?" I opened the door and was confused when I saw a wall leading nowhere on the other side. I looked closer, and it was not a solid wall, but another panel. I slid it open and my heart sank. I emerged from a previously unseen section of the entrance corridor, and I stood before the massive gate blocking the entrance, and I felt utterly defeated. The exit had brought me back to the entrance. I looked back at the mocking message and realized there really was only one way out. I paced back and forth near the door. My mind was racing, and I was struggling to cope with the fear and hopelessness I felt. As I paced about, I felt something as I stepped down and heard a sickening squelching noise. I stopped moving and was afraid to look down, but I forced myself to slowly lower my head, and I saw the eviscerated remains of the man and woman in the Raggedy Ann and Andy costumes. The silly ragdoll wigs remained, but the larger portions of their heads were missing. Apparently, the area by the door was not so safe after all. The bell rang again, and I was shocked out of my horror and into action. All I could bring myself to do was flee in a panic back the way I had come. I quickly sealed the panel and door behind me, just as I heard the slavering, growling sound of the beast stalking through the hall. I fled back the other direction and moved past the door I had taken to get into the technical corridor. I was hopeful this direction would lead somewhere, but I found a dead end. I slumped against the wall and stopped to rest. I knew at that point there was no easy way out. The fear and realization were starting to sink in. I was trapped. There was no choice. I would have to go back in and look for the switch again. I heard the bell through the wall and heard more running and crying, then screaming and death as even more players were picked off by that nightmare creature. I have been sitting here for I don't know how long. It feels like it has been a few hours, but I can't tell for sure. I don't know what to do or how long this will last. I don't think it can get me in here, but if I stay, I can't find the switch and get out. I don't think anyone else is going to get to the switch. I might be the last one left. I don't want to die. I have to try something. There is one area I have not checked upstairs. I thought I saw a strange light coming from a corner near an abandoned area close to the houses up there. I did not have time to check, but that could be it. That could be the switch. I have to find it. I can still get out. I just have to try. I am going to open the door now. The all-clear alarm has sounded, and hopefully I have some time. It's now or never. I step out into the waiting darkness and break into a run. I never cared much about Halloween. Growing up, I didn't like scary movies or dressing up, and it seemed a weird way to get candy. Now that I'm in college, my opinion hasn't really changed, though the peer pressure to go out and do something is even worse than when I was a kid. So, maybe that's why I picked this week to go home for a few days. My parents were happy to have me visit, and I was glad to see them too, though it got a bit boring after the first weekend. That's what led me to browsing my dad's recent pile of newspapers, and that's how I found the ad from last Friday's edition. So, need adult actor to play a role in my yard's Halloween decorations. Only Monday night, as that's when the trick-or-treaters are coming out. Will pay very well to the lucky employee. So, there was a local number below, and I hesitated to even call. I was just trading one Halloween for another, but technically it wasn't even Halloween yet, and if he really was paying a lot. So, hello? So, hello, my name is Becky Chatsworth. I'm calling about the ad. Do you still need someone for your lawn decorations or whatever? So, a quiet laugh, and then, I do, yes. I've had a few calls, but no one that stood out as worthwhile. So you're interested in it? Sir, maybe, yeah, if I could find out more about what you'd need me to do and how much it pays. Sir, sure, of course. You would be part of one of my lawn exhibits, playing someone partially buried. Your face would be in the free air, of course. And I don't think you'd find it uncomfortable. Basically, you'd just moan and scream and beg to be freed when people come up for candy. I'd planned for it to go from 6 p.m. until 10 p.m., though we might knock off early if there are no more trick-or-treaters, and I would pay you $400 for your time. I tried to keep my voice even. Well, yeah, that doesn't sound too bad. I'd be interested in doing the job if you'd like to use me. I do think you stand out. Yes, I don't see why not. I'll text you my address, and if you don't mind arriving at 5:30, I'll put some makeup on your face so you look appropriately ghoulish. Sound good? Yes, sir, it does. See you then. Hanging up the call, I grinned to myself. $100 an hour? Don't mind if I do. When I got to the address, I met Langford Lumley, a man in his early 60s that lived alone in a large house tucked away at the end of an otherwise empty cul-de-sac in a large neighborhood that was nice, if a bit run down with age. He invited me into a home that was cluttered but clean, though you could still see the remnants of where he had been working on Halloween decorations scattered across the living room and kitchen. Apologizing for the mess, he sat me in a kitchen chair and quickly put some makeup and fake skin on my face to make me look like the corpse I was meant to be. Looking into the mirror 10 minutes later, I was kind of amazed. "Do you do this professionally?" He gave a deep belly laugh as he blushed a little. "No, nothing like that. I learned it from my wife before she passed. She was a real talent. This stuff I do now, well, we always loved decorating, and I guess this is my way of honoring her." Sniffing sharply, he shook his head as he dug into the overalls pocket of his zombie farmer costume. When he pulled his hand back out, there was a roll of 20s that he pressed into my palm. "Here's your pay in advance. I went ahead and made it $500 since you came early, and are such a nice young lady." I frowned. "Are you sure that's a lot?" He waved away my concern. "Not at all. You're going to be the centerpiece of the whole evening. The kids'll love it." Smiling widely, he gestured to the way we'd come in. "Speaking of which, we better get you settled in before they start coming." Sir. The grave was a large metal box about 7 feet long and over 3 feet wide. The top was a hinged lid covered with realistic-looking grass that, when closed, blended in almost perfectly with the grass of the lawn. It was so good that when Langford first went over and reached into the ground to pull it open, it felt like I was watching him magically flip open a real piece of the yard. He'd grinned at my surprise. "Sir, yeah, the keys are to fit it perfectly to the hole and match the grass. Not just color, but length and type too. It's taken me a few years to get it just right." "Sir." Nodding in wonderment, I looked down into the open container I was going to be living in for the next few hours. Honestly, it didn't look that bad. It was lined inside with memory foam, with extra padding towards the top where my shoulders, arms, and head would be. I gave him a questioning look and he smiled wider, reaching into the lid to pop out cutouts for my head and arms. "Sir." "Yeah, I keep them plugged until someone is in there for appearance and safety, but it should be plenty of room for you to stick your hands and forearms through, and your face too, of course." He pointed to 2 holes in the side of the container. "I even have air being piped through so your body won't get too sweaty in there. I know it's cool out here, but with all that foam, it can get warm if you don't have ventilation." Glancing around, his eyes finally came back to me. "So does it look okay to you?" "Sir." Returning his smile, I nodded. "A grave fit for a queen." "Sir." "Sir." It really was pretty comfortable in there. The lid holes also had some foam around the edges, and while my arms would get tired occasionally, I could always pull them in. My face was more tightly surrounded by its cushioned halo, and with the lid down all the way, it would be hard to get it out without pushing against the padding beneath me and twisting hard, but I doubted it would be an issue. I was in more danger of falling asleep than anything else. The interior space, where most of my body was, had plenty of room, and I could definitely feel a small stirring of cool air against my side and legs. It was such a strange and neat thing to make, and it made me both like and pity lonely Mr. Lumley with his empty house and his full yard. "Sir." Because I was far from the only decoration outside. There were skeletons and ghosts and pumpkins. and even a large grim reaper presiding over everything from an oak tree on the opposite side from where I was buried. At first I wondered if I was even in the best spot for kids coming up. I was on the far end of the yard from the driveway. Most people would walk up trick-or-treating, and my head, while angled a bit above the surface of the ground so that I could look down and see across the yard, wasn't the most obvious thing in the world. I could be seen and heard, sure, but I definitely wouldn't stand out if I didn't move around and make noise. But then again, maybe having me go unnoticed until I started to scream was part of the plan. So, I'd been in the grave for a while before the first victims came. I had started to worry. What if no one came and he'd put all this work in for nothing? And if that happened, I knew he wouldn't ask for the money back. But should I keep it? I guess I still did the job either way, but I'd feel bad. So when the first group of kids came up, I felt more than a little relief. I almost said hey or happy Halloween or something, but I caught myself in time. Instead, I waited until they were almost to the door, and then I let out a wail. So, help me, I'm not dead yet. So, all three of them jumped and screamed, and one of them started to bolt before the biggest, probably his older brother, grabbed him with a laugh. It's a decoration, doofus. He pointed me out in the far part of the yard. It is badass to... So, happy Halloween, kids. Langford had opened the door now, and his warm and friendly zombie seemed to set them immediately at ease. We're a bit early, but that just means you can bug your parents for more candy in 3 days. So, I let out a laugh then, and when they headed back down the driveway, still eyeing me nervously, I did call after them, wishing them a good night of trick-or-treating. After that, we had a few more kids and their parents, with the pace picking up more and more as night came on. I was getting into it too, screaming at some, laughing manically at others, and I was so into looking for the next group that I didn't notice when the air circulating through the grave box stopped. It wasn't until I felt myself slowly being pushed up tighter against the head opening that I realized something was going on. So, you're going to want to take a deep breath now, as big of a breath as you can. Hold it and keep it, okay? So, Langford had somehow come up behind me, was over me staring down, and it was as I went to ask him if this was some kind of prank that I felt cold liquid spraying against my body in a torrent. I tried to pull free, but my head was too tightly in place, and when I pushed against the lid of the box, it didn't budge. So, you're wasting time, Becky. This is a quick dry resin filling up that box. It's flexible, but not enough that you'll be able to breathe well if you don't make room now. So puff out your chest, fill your lungs, and keep them full until I say. So, I wanted to argue or threaten or scream for him to let me go, but he was right. It was already halfway up my body, and I could feel it thickening as it went. I could barely move my legs now, and it took effort to pull my arms back up as high as I could get them. Talking to him or calling for help could wait until after I knew I could still breathe. Staring at him, I sucked in the biggest breath I could manage. So, the moments crawled by as the box filled almost all the way, and then stopped. My chest was burning, and I was starting to let out a slow leak of air. I had to stop. If I didn't, I wouldn't be able to take another breath again. My vision began to turn red, and I felt tears running down the sides of my face as he casually checked his watch. So, that should be good enough. So, gasping, I let out all the air and immediately started sucking more in. Just remember to keep taking big breaths so it doesn't creep in on you. So, why? I squeaked out the question as I exhaled before breathing in a new, deep breath. There was a generator going somewhere nearby, another thing I hadn't paid attention to until it was too late, and I was worried he wouldn't be able to hear me at all. So, but he did. Smiling, he just shook his head. It's funny. You're scared, terrified you're going to die, and you still ask why before you ask me to let you go? Langford tapped the side of his nose. That's not uncommon either. I used to think it was because people are naturally curious and want the truth, but more and more I think it's just because people are so entitled, so conditioned to having life work out like they want, that the idea of someone doing something like this, well, it offends them more than it scares them. He snickered nastily as he walked along the side of my grave. But no, I won't tell you why. My reasons are my own. And if you want to have any chance at all, you better save your cries for help for the next batch of trick-or-treaters. His face brightened. Here they come now. So, as he ambled off to get his basket of candy, I started screaming to the couple bringing their little girls up the driveway. "Sir, please help me. This isn't a joke. I'm not a decoration. He's crazy and he's trapped me in here." "Sir." The man in the couple glanced over at me nervously, but the woman just laughed as she pulled the kids up to the door. For his part, Langford just guffawed and waved to me as he filled their bags with candy. "Sir." "Please, call the police. He's going to kill me." "Sir." They were walking away now, and the man did pause for a moment, glancing over at me and back at Langford, but Langford just laughed again and wished them a happy Halloween. And when the woman pulled on his arm, the man started moving again with a nervous laugh. "Sir." That's the way it went for the next 2 hours. I would scream and beg and threaten and none of it mattered. Most people thought it was part of the show, and whenever anyone started to look worried or concerned, Langford was just make a joke about how he needed to bury his victims deeper next year or offer them a caramel apple. They wanted to believe it was fake, so it didn't take much for him to convince them to take their candy and go. "Sir." I tried everything I could think of, but there wasn't much I could do. The resin or whatever that he'd filled the grave with was too strong to move through. I couldn't reach my phone or move my body at all except for my head and hands, and even that was only a little. I could almost get my hands under the lip of their cutouts in the lid, but my head didn't want to move it. "Sir." I think it's slowing down. Time to do a big finale for the next group. "Sir." I rolled my eyes up to where Langford stood on his porch. Please let me go. I won't tell anyone. It was all just an extreme decoration prank or something, right?" "Sir." He didn't laugh this time, but just stared at me somberly. "I think you know better than that, don't you, Becky?" "Sir." Silence stretched between us for a few moments as I tried to think of something else to say or do. It was then that I heard a group of kids coming up the driveway, talking excitedly. "Sir." "Happy Halloween, kids. Got lots of candy left, but even better, I have a special surprise if you'll wait there just a minute." The 5 kids slowed to a stop, and Langford took that as all the agreement he needed to head around the other side of the house. "Be right back." "Sir." As soon as he was out of sight, one of the kids, a thin blonde girl in a devil costume, headed across the yard in my direction. I immediately tried to catch her eye as I spoke in a lower tone of voice. "Sir." "Little girl, hey, I need you to help me. This man is crazy. He has me trapped in here. I need you to call the police, or go home and tell your parents, okay? Please, this is super important and I'm not joking. Please get help right now." "Sir." The little girl had stopped, swinging her jack-o'-lantern bucket as she listened to me intently. When I finished, she gave a small giggle as she grinned at me. "Sir." "You're funny." "Sir." With that, she went on past me and out of my peripheral vision. What the fuck was wrong with her? Anyway, it didn't matter. I started calling out to the other kids, asking them to come closer, thinking that if I could find one that wasn't an idiot or warped, me talking to them seriously might get one to get help more than me yelling like a Halloween lawn ornament. But none of the others would come. They'd look my way nervously and laugh a little, but that was it. And a couple of minutes later, the girl was walking back past. I could smell gasoline coming from her, and when I looked at her pumpkin basket now, I could see it dripping down the side. Had she gone and taken gas from around the generator I was hearing? Fucking why? "Sir." I called out to her again, but she didn't look back, and by the time she had made it back to the driveway, I could hear a new sound approaching, another mechanical sound, a familiar sound. The image came to me right as it came around the corner. "Sir." Langford on a large riding lawnmower. "Sir." He stopped in front of the kids, keeping his seat as he gestured at the yard with the flair of a circus ringmaster. "Kids, with all this Halloween preparation, I've really let my yard go. It may be time to cut the grass." "Sir." More nervous laughter from the kids. "Sir." "What do you guys think? Think I should mow the lawn?" "Sir." A couple of them said yeah, but the blonde girl and the others just smiled and watched, happy with the agreement he'd managed to get. Langford put the mower back in gear. "Well, let's get to it then." "Sir." He started making a wide, lazy circle across the yard, and I wanted to scream, but I couldn't stop staring at the mower as it drew closer. This wasn't a joke. The blade was moving and cutting, not a lot, but I could see bits of higher weeds slinging out as he drew closer to my end of the lawn. The grave wasn't at the very edge, so he circled around behind me on the first lap, giving me a finger waggle as he promised to be back soon. I did start screaming then, but the kids weren't going to move a muscle. and no one else was coming up. And when he turned back again, he was headed straight for me at full speed. So, squealing, I pulled my hands down as far as I could and tried to yank my head back against the foam as hard as I could. The mower was wide enough to straddle the sides of the grave easily, and I could feel the vibration of it coming before I saw the underside of the mower start to pass over me. I caught a glimpse of whirling metal before dirt went into my eyes, and I closed them, ramming my head down and back as far as it would go. So, when I felt the mower pass on by, at first I thought I was okay. My eyes were burning and pouring water, but no, I could feel cold wetness pouring down the sides of my cheeks and into my mouth. So, he'd cut off the tip of my nose. So, fuck, help you little fucks. Go get the cops, or so help me I'll fucking get. You'll all go to fucking prison. Do you see me bleeding? Go get help. So, my vision wasn't great, but I could see they still weren't moving. The little blonde girl with her bucket of gas was in the front, and while the others at least had the decency to look scared, she was smiling excitedly as Langford pulled up near them again. So, what do you think, kids? Is the grass low enough now, or should I go ahead and cut it lower? I've rebuilt this thing myself, you know, and I'm kind of itching to see what it can do. He chuckled good-naturedly to the children before focusing on the devil girl. What do you think, sweetheart? Think the yard has had enough, or should I cut some more? So, she looked down the yard to me, meeting my eyes for a moment as her smile grew bigger. Looking back at him, she gave a small but vigorous nod. I think you should cut more. I think you should cut it all the way. So, Langford let out a bellowing laugh as he put the lawnmower back in gear. Your wish is my command. Dropping the cutting deck down as far as it would go, he began moving towards me, but slower this time. So, stop, please stop, just let me go, I'm sorry, oh God. So, I looked past him and saw another couple of people had wandered up, a woman and her boy. They were watching with only mild interest as Langford trundled toward me, the little boy letting out a loud, discontented belch as they stared. So, fuck, oh help me. So, I could feel the ground shaking around me now, the whole world shaking. I pulled my head and hands down again, but it wouldn't be enough, not nearly enough. I kept screaming as I felt the air from the whirring blade move against my cheek. So, oh God help me, please I remember the accident like it was yesterday. Unlike many people who say they can't recall their crashes, I remember every detail of that day. It was winter, and the sun was setting early in the evening. I had gotten off work late. The daylight was now long gone and rain was coming down, making the roads slick and visibility poor. I was driving my usual route home, thinking about what to pick up for dinner, when it happened. An oncoming truck suddenly swerved into my lane and came straight for me, head on. In that brief moment, I felt a rush of terror and a millisecond of clear understanding that I was about to die. Then, everything went black. I woke up in a hospital room. I heard the beeping of the machines first, followed by the smell of antiseptic. I slowly began to open my eyes to the blinding of fluorescent lights. I heard a machine begin to beep faster, as confusion and panic began to wash over me. Whoa, easy there, I heard a voice say. You've been in an accident. You're in the hospital and you're safe now. For a moment I saw a face next to me, pretty and comforting. That was my last thought, before everything went black again. I'm not sure how much time passed before I woke up again. Feeling more alert this time, I looked around the room, getting a bearing on my surroundings. I knew, based on the number of monitors and IVs hooked up to me, that I must have been in bad shape. As I blinked against the brightness, a nurse entered, a beacon of warmth in the cold, clinical environment. She had an air of calm that made me feel immediately safe amidst the chaos. Hello again. I'm Lily, she said, her smile softening the edges of my fear. You passed out before I could introduce myself last time. I'm one of your nurses. Her kindness radiated as she checked my vitals, her gentle touch igniting a flicker of comfort in me. Day by day, she became my anchor, the one constant in a world that felt hopeless. As the days stretched into weeks, our conversations grew more personal. I found myself sharing bits of my life, my dreams and fears, revealing the vulnerable pieces of myself that I rarely showed. Lily listened, her eyes sparkling with empathy, her laughter soothing. I realized I was falling for her, hard. Her presence in my recovery brightened my days and made me forget the pain. The more time we spent together, the more I felt a sense of normalcy return to my life. During a particularly quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting my hospital room in hues of orange and pink, I knew I had fallen in love with her. She had just finished her shift and came to check on me before leaving. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, the tiredness in her eyes overshadowed by the warmth of her smile. Feeling bold, I asked, "So, when I get out of here, can I take you to dinner?" She smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "Yes, I'd love that," her face blushing. In that moment, I felt a connection between us, something electric that pulsed in the air. After another couple weeks of healing, I was finally discharged. I sat outside the hospital, the sun warming my skin, a stark contrast to the cold sterility I had grown accustomed to. I kept my word to Lily, taking her out for dinner a few days later, and the rest, as they say, was history. We began to explore the possibility of a life together. We found the perfect little house on the outskirts of town, its white picket fence a picture of domestic bliss. It felt like a dream. The house was modest, but was a fresh start, a blank canvas on which we could build our lives together. We spent countless hours painting the walls, arranging furniture, and filling the space with our personalities. As we settled into our new life, I couldn't have been happier. Lily was everything I had ever wanted, kind, intelligent, and fiercely supportive. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring us together, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of belonging. I felt thankful for the crash that brought her to me. Months passed, and we only grew closer. We shared dreams of starting a family and growing old together in that cozy little home. We'd sit on the porch watching the sunset, discussing our plans and laughing at inside jokes. But over time, something started to change in that house. Something started to change in Lily. It started as small things. Objects would get misplaced. The trash can would be knocked over. Lily and I would tease each other for being forgetful, each of us assuming it was the other. But then things began to happen that I knew couldn't have been her. One night, while cooking dinner, I got the milk out of the refrigerator and set it on the counter. When I turned back around, it was gone. Back in the refrigerator, doors would creak open, the TV would change channels by itself. I began to feel uneasy in the house, like I was being watched. One night, while sitting on the couch, I brought the topic up to Lily. "Do you ever feel strange in this house, like you're being watched?" I asked. "No, not at all. Are you being serious?" she replied. "Oh, come on. You mean to tell me you've never thought it's weird that things move around on their own all the time? How our stuff always gets misplaced? You've never heard the doors opening and shutting by themselves?" I said. "Hallucinations are normal after a bad injury. Maybe we need to go get you checked out," Lily said. Her dismissiveness touched my nerves. "I'm not hallucina—" "I think you should just let it go," she interrupted. Her cold response caught me off guard, and for the first time I felt a rift between us. That night, I laid in bed, staring up at the ceiling, replaying the conversation I'd had with Lily earlier. It wasn't even a real fight, but it lingered in my mind. Lately, it had started to feel like we were both on edge, with something unspoken weighing between us, and it wasn't just that conversation. It was everything in this house. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was being watched, even now. I closed my eyes, willing myself to ignore the sense of dread, trying to drift off. But just as I felt myself slipping towards sleep, I heard it. A voice, close and quiet, whispering my name. "David." It wasn't Lily's voice. It was urgent, almost pleading, as though someone was right there in the room with me, waiting for me to respond. I jolted upright, heart pounding as I looked around the room, trying to find the source of the whisper. I strained my ears, waiting to hear it again, but there was nothing, just the sound of my own heavy breathing. I turned and saw Lily beside me, fast asleep, her breathing slow and steady. She looked peaceful, completely undisturbed. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it, just a product of my own frayed nerves and lack of sleep. But as I lay back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, close enough to whisper right into my ear. I woke up the next morning, more on edge than ever after my experience the night before. But Lily was in good spirits, and her kind and fun personality was contagious, bringing me out of my slump. And for the next few days, things seemed to settle down. No strange noises, no objects moving, just quiet nights and a gradual return to normalcy. I started to feel more like myself, and I wondered if maybe it had all been my imagination. Stress from moving, adjusting to a new life together, recovering after my injuries, nothing more. We'd started laughing together again, our conversations and routines falling back into place. The strangeness of the house all but completely left my mind when one afternoon I was in the shower. I heard the bathroom door slowly open, and I could hear someone come in, their footsteps quiet but distinct. Through the steamy curtain, I could see the shadow of a figure approaching the shower and standing right outside, just lingering there. I waited for a second, waiting to hear Lily speak or open the curtain, but the figure just stood outside of the shower. I grinned, calling out to Lily, "Oh, coming to join me." "Huh?" I opened the curtain to peek, only to find no one was there. The door was closed, as if no one had entered at all. A chill crawled up my spine. I jumped out of the shower, quickly wrapping myself in a towel, and hurried into the living room. I found Lily on the couch, casually watching TV, completely at ease. "Oh yeah, very funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced up, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Coming into the bathroom while I was in the shower," I said, feeling a prickle of annoyance. "Were you just standing there to freak me out?" Lily's face hardened. "I didn't go in there, David, and honestly, this stuff you keep bringing up, the whispers." "Stuff moving. It's getting old." "Old? You think I'm making it up?" "Yes. I don't know what's going on with you, but you need to let all this go. None of it is real. Just let it go and focus on us, on our life together. I'm sick of hearing about it." Her reaction stung. I hadn't seen her that frustrated before, and as we argued, a tension settled between us. It was our first real argument, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something much deeper was happening. That night, after lying awake, I finally drifted off to sleep, hoping things would settle in the morning. I finally fell asleep, only to wake up to the feeling of eyes on me. In the darkness, I could make out a figure standing next to the bed, staring down at me. It was Lily's figure. Her face was covered in shadow, but I could hear her lips moving, whispering something just out of earshot. My heart pounded as I reached out, my voice barely a whisper. "Lily, what are you doing? What's wrong?" She didn't answer. She continued to whisper, quiet and unsettling, and I felt a deep, crawling fear sink into my bones. The whispering grew faster, more urgently. Fumbling, I reached over and switched on the bedside lamp. Light flooded the room, and my heart nearly stopped when I realized Lily was lying next to me, fast asleep. No one else was there. The room was empty, silent, except for the faint sound of her breathing. There was no one next to my bed, no one whispering. In the days that followed, a wall seemed to build between Lily and me. She grew colder, barely acknowledging me with anything more than a nod or a short answer. Her once warm smile and playful remarks were replaced with a distant, almost vacant expression. Every time I tried to break through, I felt like I was talking to a stranger. Meanwhile, the strange events increased around the house, now not only in the dead of night, but now in broad daylight. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of my vision, slipping away whenever I tried to look directly, and the whispers, the same unsettling, faint voices I had once heard only at night, now crept into my waking hours. They'd drift in and out, low and unintelligible, just enough to put my nerves on edge. Objects seemed to be shifting around too. I'd leave my keys on the counter, only to find them on the coffee table moments later. Kitchen drawers would be rearranged. What was once our cutlery drawer became our junk drawer. What was once our plate cabinet became our Tupperware cabinet. I felt as the house itself was subtly working against me, trying to drive me insane. Every strange thing left me more anxious, questioning my own sanity. Was I imagining things? I started doubting myself, my sanity, until, one afternoon, I heard it again. My name, whispered clear and close. I spun around, expecting to find an empty room, but instead, I caught a glimpse of Lily's face just before she darted out of sight, slipping around the corner of the hallway. My stomach twisted, and a wave of nausea hit me. What the hell was she doing, hiding around the corner and whispering my name? I found her in the kitchen, casually chopping vegetables as though nothing had happened. "Lily," I said, my voice strained. "What were you just doing?" She looked up, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" "I just saw you," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "You were whispering my name, hiding around the corner." She stared at me, a hint of amusement flickering in her eyes. but her expression was empty of any warmth. "Oh, David," she said in a low, almost mocking tone, "I think you're seeing things." Her words hung in the air, cold and dismissive, sending a chill down my spine. The way she looked at me, almost taunting, made my skin crawl. I opened my mouth to argue, to ask her why she was acting like this, but the look on her face stopped me. There was something so unsettling in her gaze, like she was holding back something dark. As I turned and walked out of the kitchen, I could have sworn I heard a faint laugh come from her. A new fear emerged in me, a feeling that somehow, just maybe, Lily had something to do with all the strange things happening around the house. I tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't Lily. Maybe there was something about the house itself that was warping her behavior. It was the only thing that made sense. She'd never acted this way before. She most definitely was not acting like the same person I had fallen in love with. I was determined to get answers. I began by looking through the home's deed and ownership history. Late at night, I sat at my computer, combing through property records. I found every sale, every name tied to the house. Oddly, it was short. A few owners here and there, but no gaps or missing entries. Every person who'd lived here had sold and left within a handful of years, but the reasons were normal. Nothing I found hinted at anything dark. No one had died in the house, nothing. The house wasn't especially old either. It was built in the 1980s, with nothing more than a couple of renovations over the years. I started thinking maybe the land held some kind of dark secret, so I checked historical records. I combed through old property maps and records of ownership before the house was built, but all I saw was bland suburban history. The land had been nothing but an empty field and a minor farmland a century ago. No battle sites, no cemeteries, no tragedies marked on record. It seemed impossible that there was nothing here, nothing unusual to explain what I had been experiencing. Growing desperate, I went to the library, combing through archived newspapers and town records. I looked for articles about the neighborhood, hoping for some small hint. A tragedy in a neighboring house, an unexplained death, anything. But all I could find were the usual town tidbits: a mayoral election, a local high school sports game, maybe a yard sale advertised on an old flyer. I started diving into forums and paranormal sites late at night, reading stories about hauntings and researching symptoms and causes of cursed houses. I searched the house for any strange artifacts hidden in the crawl space, looking for any ritual markings carved in the wood. I had even hired a professional, while Lily was at work, to do X-ray and ultrasound mapping of the walls and yard to find anything that may be hidden, body or otherwise. But again, nothing. It felt like I was going mad. I'd pored over every lead, every scrap of information, and still I had nothing to explain what was happening. And that's when the doubt set in. Maybe it really was just my imagination. Maybe I had a lingering head injury from my crash. The lack of evidence left me with nothing but that answer. One evening I sat Lily down and admitted to her that I thought I might be losing it. I was embarrassed, vulnerable, but she listened, patient and empathetic. She suggested seeing a psychologist and mentioned one she knew who did house calls. The psychologist came by a few days later. He was calm and reassuring, his voice low and steady as we spoke in the living room. He asked about my sleep, stress levels, and any major life changes. I found myself unloading everything: the strange occurrences, Lily's unsettling behavior, even the bizarre visions. He listened without judgment and offered to prescribe me some medication to ease my anxiety. I was hesitant, but out of desperation, I agreed to give it a try. For a time, it seemed to work. I felt more grounded. The strange events faded into the background, and Lily seemed more herself, warm and easygoing, like she used to be. I felt like I could finally breathe, reassured that it all really had been my mind playing tricks on me. Life slowly crept back to normal, and I was relieved to think I'd found a solution. But as the days went on, things began to shift again, subtly at first. One morning, I woke up and made my way down the hallway toward the kitchen, still drowsy and rubbing my eyes. As I approached, I heard low voices, Lily's unmistakably, but with a murmur that sounded like a man's voice replying. I froze just outside the door, trying to make out the words, but they were muffled, secretive. I turned the corner, but Lily snapped back to cooking breakfast, alone at the stove as though nothing had happened. "Who the hell were you just talking to?" I asked, my voice sounding a little too accusatory. She shrugged. "I was just talking to myself. What's wrong with you?" The suspicion bubbled up again, more intense than ever. I didn't press further, but from that day on, my trust in her began to fracture. I stopped taking the medication, hoping that it might sharpen my senses again. I began to feel it again, something dark and wrong within the house, and with Lily. I began to question if I should leave. On my last day in the house, I was carrying a load of laundry down the hall when something caught the corner of my eye in the bathroom. I thought I saw a reflection in the mirror. Maybe it's Lily behind the door, trying to scare me, I thought. I paused, shifting the pile of clothes in my arms, and backed up, peering inside. In the dim light of the mirror, I saw a reflection. There, standing just behind the half-shut door, was a mangled figure. Its face was contorted, flesh torn and bruised, eyes vacant but fixed directly on me. Blood seeped down its jaw, dripping onto a chest split open and raw. I couldn't look away, couldn't even breathe. Then in a hoarse, deep voice it said my name, "David." The clothes tumbled from my arms as I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. A scream ripped through me, loud and desperate, and then Lily rushed in, flipping on the hallway light. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice sharp. I pointed desperately toward the bathroom. The bathroom was empty, and the mirror was clear, but I couldn't shake the image. I tried to explain, but she waved it off, her face tight with irritation. She seemed so cold, so detached, almost as if she were an entirely different person. In that moment, something in me broke. I felt the hot sting of tears as I looked at Lily, really looked at her, and saw how empty she seemed. I could barely keep my voice steady. "Lily, what happened to you? Why are you acting like this?" My voice cracked, a desperate plea. "What are you hiding from me? I know what I saw. I know what I've been hearing, and I think you know it too." She looked at me, her expression unreadable, but something shifted in her eyes, something dark, cold, almost mocking. She tilted her head just slightly, her lips curling into a slow, unsettling smile. "David," she said, her voice low and eerily calm, "you're just so tired. Why don't you just rest? Stop worrying so much." A chill ran down my spine, and goosebumps rose in my skin. In that moment, I knew I had to leave, to get as far away from her and the house as possible. That night, as I got in bed, I made up my mind. First thing in the morning, I would pack my things, find a hotel, and leave without looking back. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to sleep, but the unease gnawed at me, twisting knots of fear into my chest. But I also felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, and I quickly drifted off to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, a whisper broke the silence. "David." My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. The voice was right next to my ear, soft but insistent. I turned slowly and saw a shadowy figure by the bedside, hovering close. It was Lily again, her head pointed down toward me, the rest of her figure outlined in the darkness. Terrified, I reached over and desperately felt for the bedside lamp, flicking it on. I expected the figure to vanish as it always did, but it didn't, not this time. She was still standing there, staring, eyes wide and unblinking, her lips moving ever so slightly, whispering my name. "David! David!" My breath caught in my throat as I realized she wasn't alone. Behind her, fully visible in the light, was the figure from the bathroom mirror, the mangled, bloodied apparition, its face a grotesque mask of agony and violence. Its eyes were hollow, yet I felt its gaze pierce right through me. As I froze, paralyzed with terror, Lily leaned closer, still whispering, "Stay with us, David. Stay with us." Her voice grew softer, blending into a low, raspy tone that sounded distinctly wrong, too deep, almost inhuman. "Stay with me, David." The figure behind her moved, body crunching and contorting as it stepped closer. Lily's voice morphed further, deepening into a man's voice, repeating the words like a chant. "Stay with us, David. Stay with me. Come on. Stay with me." I clutched the sheets, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the horrible voices in the room. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My bedside lamp began to grow brighter, and I heard the bulb began to ring. Lily and the figure got closer, both now reaching out toward me in unison. The room began to fall apart as the light grew brighter. The ringing of the light bulb now turned into something else, like a rhythmic beeping. I felt like I was being pulled and felt a flash of extreme pain. "Stay with us, David. Stay with us." I opened my eyes weakly to the sight of lights flashing by, bright and blinding. I felt a sear of pain and faces surrounding me, and I was being rushed down a hallway, with a male doctor repeating the phrase to me. Everything went black again. After some time, I woke up, finding myself in a hospital room with a doctor standing by my bed. "Hello there, welcome back. We almost lost you." What happened? Where am I?" I managed to get out. "You were in a car accident. Truck hit you head on. Damn, son, you're lucky to be alive. You've been in surgery and you're stable now. You're going to be all right. Go ahead and get some rest," the doctor said. Where's Lily?" I asked him. "Is Lily a family member? Would you like us to call her?" he replied. "She's a nurse here. She's my girlfriend." "No nurses named Lily here. Get some rest. You're going to need it for your recovery." Over the following weeks, doctors and psychologists worked with me to put together the pieces. They explained that my brain had tried to shield me from the trauma of the accident and coma by creating an elaborate world to cope with the void. The term they used was maladaptive daydreaming and something called post-traumatic confabulation, where the brain fills in gaps with constructed realities, places, people, entire lives to help make sense of the trauma. They told me it was common for coma patients to create people or worlds in their minds, to anchor themselves to some form of reality, even if it was a fabrication. In my case, the creation was Lily. My brain had then constructed an antagonist, the house, the paranormal events, in an attempt to pull me back out. At first, the revelations hit me like a physical blow. I felt the ground fall out beneath me, leaving only emptiness where she had been. I hadn't just lost Lily. I'd lost the life we'd built, the home we'd created, the future I thought was waiting for us. No matter how terrifying things became in the end, there was a life there that felt real, a purpose, a love. It has been 2 years since then. I have begun to rebuild my life, but the weight of that loss still clings to me, silent and unyielding. Friends and family urge me to move on, but I feel tethered to something that no one else can see. Every time I'd try to meet someone new, I'd feel the ghost of Lily beside me. Even though she wasn't real, nothing could match the love I felt with her. That connection, imagined as it was, left a mark that no reality can seem to replace. One doctor called it a phantom limb of the heart. The absence of her is something I feel as clearly as if she'd truly been there. Despite knowing she was never real, I still find myself longing for the love I'd had with her, even down to the fear, the mystery, the strange events. It was all something real to me. I still dream of her sometimes, her face still as clear as when I had known her. In my dreams, I'm back in our house during those first few months when everything was perfect, and I always wake up finding myself back here. I used to live in the middle of backwoods Pennsylvania, near a set of train tracks that ran through the woods. About once, maybe twice a week, I would hear the cry of a train horn splitting the air, always at a different time, but usually in the early morning or late evening. Sometimes it would even wake me from a dead sleep in the middle of the night. The little house I was renting was nice, at the very end of the cul-de-sac I lived in, and nestled back against a copse of trees. I wasn't entirely sure where the train tracks were, since they didn't run through town anywhere, but every time I was startled by the piercing cry, I thought it sounded like it was coming from the woods. The longer I lived in that little house, the more curious I got about the train. It probably sounds silly, but I've always liked trains, and even though I found the train horn startling, it was comforting in a weird way too. Every time it sounded, my ears would perk up, and I would find myself tracing the sound as it moved, trying to pinpoint exactly where it came from and where it was going to. Finally, after about a year of that, I decided to take one of my days off and go look for the train tracks. I put a few bottles of water and some snacks in a backpack, put on my favorite pair of walking shoes, and practically skipped out the front door. It reminded me of being a kid. I didn't have the best home life, so it wasn't uncommon for me to pack a bag with enough provisions and comic books for the day before disappearing into the woods near our house. The woods were my escape, a place where I was safe from anger, yelling, and whatever my parents were throwing at each other that day. The forest was always calm and quiet. It made me feel safe, a feeling I couldn't always get at home. As I walked out my back door, I was reminded of that, and how much I loved going for those walks as a kid. I'll admit, I think I was expecting it to feel just as safe and magical now, but oh, how wrong I was. The forest itself was perfect. Silence punctuated only by the occasional bird call or rustle of the leaves brushing each other in the wind. It was an early spring day, and the earth was spongy from recent rainfall. Dew dripped lazily from the green trees and sparkled on the tall grass as I walked through it. I made my way in the approximate direction I heard the train horn coming from, no real plan in mind for when I found it, just enjoying the breeze as it played with my hair. After about an hour, I finally found the train tracks and let out an excited whoop when they came into view. I raced forward like a little kid until I got right next to them. Then I began walking parallel to the tracks, towards the mountains in the distance. My parents had always told me not to walk near train tracks, but I always wanted to follow them just once to see where I wound up. I followed the train tracks with a spring in my step, not noticing the sun sinking lower in the sky until the shadows grew long enough in front of me to blend together into one big pool of shadow. When I realized the sun was starting to go down, I stopped. I had been so lost in my thoughts and in finally fulfilling a childhood dream that I hadn't realized how late it was. I turned around and followed the train tracks, now at a quicker pace, until I reached the area I thought I had started from. I was still following the tracks when a figure emerged from the twilight on the path in front of me. I couldn't make out any details, but it seemed to be entirely grey, like a smudge of ash on the horizon growing steadily larger. Something about it really unsettled me, which I attributed to being a woman walking alone at night and seeing a stranger approach in the twilight. I veered off the tracks and made my way through the woods, emerging one neighborhood over from my own, and followed the streets back to my house, exhausted by the time I finally got there. I guess the stranger I saw on the tracks just left my mind. I didn't think about it at all for the rest of the night, and by the time I woke up the next day, I didn't even remember the vaguely unsettling encounter. It was a few weeks before I was able to make it back into the woods, but once another lazy day off came around, I packed my bag and escaped out the back door again. This time I left a bit earlier and went the other direction, towards what I assumed would be town, or maybe the next town over. I figured if I wandered to the next town by accident, I could always take a taxi home. This was before Uber was very popular. This time, I took a can of spray paint and made a huge blue X on one of the trees that I could see from the tracks, so I would know where to head back into the woods to get home. I can't say for sure, but that decision might have saved my life. Again, time seemed to escape me, and before I knew it, it was late afternoon. I turned myself around, and once again saw a smudge on the distant horizon, slowly approaching me and taking shape. This time there was enough light that I assumed it would be fine. Probably just another person wandering the train tracks to fill their empty Sunday afternoon. I kept walking, studying the trees surrounding the tracks on either side, and admiring the giant purple mountains in front of me. I was startled from my reverie to realize that what had been nothing more than a smudge the last time I looked was now a person, just a few hundred yards away at most. I studied him as he approached. He seemed to be wearing a grey three-piece suit and grey shoes. His hair was grey too. He carried some kind of bag. It looked like a white trash bag, like one of the really heavy-duty ones, and it almost looked like it was filled with a liquid. It heaved and sagged, even though he carried it with such ease it could have been full of helium. I'll admit, I didn't find him terrifying at first. It was a lovely afternoon, I was enjoying myself, and I've always been a really friendly person, so I was actually kind of excited that I might get to meet one of my neighbors out on my little walk. But when we were close enough for me to greet him, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was like all my senses shut down, and the only thing I was left with was this awful feeling of complete and total revulsion. Despite my vision going grey around the edges, I forced myself to keep walking, to get past the mystery person and closer to home. When we were right next to each other, all my senses returned to normal, and I noticed with a pang of fear and concern that even the man's skin was an ashy shade of grey. He continued to face forward, but his face seemed to melt and twist in my direction. All the features remained clear, but it was like the skin behind his face was melting, allowing the face itself to slip in my direction. He smiled at me, flashing grey teeth and the corner of a grey tongue peeking out of his mouth. Then he passed me, and I took a huge gulp of air, trying to calm my rioting stomach and nerves. Despite how badly I wanted to collapse to the earth and sob from whatever the hell that was, I forced myself to keep walking. Now more than ever, I just wanted to get home. After a few more minutes of walking, I managed to convince myself I had just imagined it, or maybe the man had some kind of medical condition and I was being unfair to judge him so harshly. As I successfully guilt-tripped myself into brushing off the weirdness, I noticed something on the horizon, a grey smudge that seemed to be getting closer to me. I debated it for a moment, then allowed myself to stop and turn around. There was nothing behind me, no traces of the strange grey man. I turned back around, and somehow he had managed to clear almost all the distance between us in the time it took me to turn around and back. I forced myself to keep walking, insisting to my now terrified brain that it was a coincidence, or I had spaced out for longer than I realized. As I got closer to the man, I forced a smile onto my own face, and with every ounce of courage I had asked, "Hey there, didn't we just see each other?" The look on his face didn't alter in the slightest, and neither did his stride as he approached. His mouth opened, and a voice as grey as a tombstone said, "We'll be seeing a lot of each other." The smile on his face stayed in place as mine faltered and crashed, and I picked up my pace to get past him as quickly as possible. As I did, a scent I hadn't noticed before wafted from his trash bag to my nose, and I had to resist the need, it was more than an urge, to vomit. What I smelled can only be described as death, plain and simple. It assaulted my nostrils and filled my mind with images of death and destruction, things I never could have pictured on my own. War-torn battlefields scattered with the flesh and blood of innocent people, bodies torn apart by animals, corpses swaying in the breeze, glassy eyes still begging for a savior, even though it was far too late. I gasped, pressing my hands to my mouth and nose, and hurried away. After a few minutes the smell was gone, but the images and nausea remained. I couldn't understand what was wrong with me, and more than anything I just wanted to get home, to safety and my comfiest chair. But I was still at least an hour away from my house. I glanced behind me again, let out a sigh of relief when I saw the grey man still walking away from me, then bit my tongue so hard I drew blood when I turned back and saw another grey smudge on the horizon. I whipped my head around again and saw he had disappeared. With resignation to my fate, I turned back around already knowing what would be in front of me. Sure enough, the grey man with the grey smile was once again a few hundred yards in front of me. I bit back a little sob and looked around, wondering if I could get away from him somehow. Most of the area between the tracks and the trees was filled with grass and weeds that would go up at least to my waist. I would have been fine with that, except I'm terrified of ticks and didn't want to risk taking one home with me. As the stranger approached in the distance, I weighed my options, past the creepy old guy again, or risk getting a parasite. It was a hard choice, but I finally took a deep breath and plunged into the tall grass. I glanced over at the tracks, almost against my will, and breathed a sigh of relief. He wasn't there. He must have done his little disappearing trick when I stepped off the tracks. I smiled in relief and faced front again, my heart shattering into violent little shards in my chest as I jumped backwards and to the side. He was directly in front of me again, with that same carved from stone grey-toothed smile. He continued walking forward, eyes on the horizon, fist clenched around the trash bag in his hand. I stopped moving and simply stared at him as he passed, begging my mind to make sense of what was happening. Something in the bag sloshed, and the smell of blood and death overwhelmed me, making me feel sick all over again. I pressed my hands into my eyes, but when I opened them, the grey man was still there, walking away from me, his pace the same as ever. I forced myself to root to the spot and watch him walk away. I waited until the shadows grew longer, and he was once again just a grey smudge on the horizon. When I turned back around, I was angry but not surprised to see the grey smear in front of me again. I sighed and continued walking, telling myself it was a coincidence or I was imagining things. But as he came back into focus, a distant part of my mind screamed that I was in danger. I made the mistake of shoving that voice and its wisdom to the back of my mind. I had to get home. I didn't want to walk in the tall grass and risk getting a tick, and the grey man was going to be there no matter what I did, so I might as well follow the tracks until I made it back home. This time when the grey man got closer, the smell was the first thing that greeted me. I choked down my vomit and blinked tears from my eyes as I took a deep breath and held it. When the man was about 10 feet from me, something in his smile changed. He didn't move exactly, but his lower jaw seemed to grow, as if the hinges of his jaw were melting and allowing his face to sink lower and lower. For the first time his eyes met mine, and I knew I had made a horrible mistake. By the time he passed me, his jaw was down to his chest, but his eyes had never left mine. Once he was behind me, I began sprinting, only interested in getting home before it was completely dark. Up ahead, I could just see the bright blue X I had spray painted on the tree, and I veered away from the tracks again, now running through the grass with no other thought in mind than getting back home. But as I ran, my vision began to blur slightly. The shadows of the trees turned grey and seemed to take on more form. Something grey appeared right in front of the tree I had painted on, slowly morphing into a grey man walking towards me, trash bag swinging from his hand. I halted, waited until he was a few feet from me, then bolted to the side, into the tree line. I crashed through the trees wildly, paying attention to nothing except the grey smudges that would appear in front of me, taking shape into the man more rapidly each time. By the time I saw my house in the distance, the grey man was practically running alongside me, smile still carved into his face, bag still swinging in his hand, liquid and whatever else it contained sloshing around inside. I made it inside and locked the doors and windows, but outside I could still see the two pale shadows lurking, taking on the form of a man before disappearing again. I left Pennsylvania not long after that. It lost all its charm for me, but when I lay down in bed at night, all I can see when I close my eyes is the grey man off in the distance. He gets closer every night, and I know someday he'll catch me.